I'm the Chief Deputy Director for the California Department of Aging. I would like to thank everybody who was able to physically come out to CDA today. Welcome. And I hope you didn't have too much trouble finding our facilities. I'd also like to thank all of our presenters yesterday who presented on group living settings. I thought it was a very robust discussion. It highlighted a lot of challenges for our facilities, such as infrastructure, financing, workforce issues, as well as a number of opportunities, such as accessibility, expansion of care models, and alternative models. Today, the focus of the meeting will be on LTSS integration, infrastructure, system financing, and state leadership. The materials are all posted on our website. I do apologize we were not able to post the materials sooner. Part of the challenge with these past three meetings has been we're coming off the holidays, and there's a lot of work that needs to be done with development, editing, and making our documents ADA accessible. But they're all posted on the website now. And I would like to do a special shout out for everybody who helped develop slides for these presentations. Again, working on very tight time frames, as well as to our phenomenal consultant, Carrie Graham, who is responsible for putting together all of these slide decks into one cohesive whole. She does a great job, and the decks are always of very high quality. Okay, so meeting logistics. We thought that we had the Zoom issue whipped, but apparently we still have some issues with Zoom. It tends to happen late in the meeting. We are researching the causes of the dropped calls. But today, if we have a similar issue, what we'll likely do is just take a break and get the call back online so that we don't have interruptions for people who are trying to speak. For those of you who are in the room, we do not have Wi-Fi capability yet. You will be deceived because you will see CDA guests come up as a network. that network does not work. However, if you look in front of you,
it's going to be there in a week. See it? It's right up there.
Yeah,
We can all just stay for a week.
We do have hotspots available though, so please feel free to find these network names and type in the password, and you should be able to get onto the hotspot. One caution is we are in the center of the building, so the hotspot availability sometimes is a little spotty.
Not very hot.
We do have a meeting guideline to refrain from the use of electronic devices, so hopefully that makes it a little more tolerable for you.
I know electronic.
That's the people who rely on this. Okay, meeting agenda, and actually. No, it's not.
I also have a hotspot which I can turn on if folks need it.
Oh, thank you so much, Peter.
Wow.
Really,
She gave it to you. Yep.
really generous.
Very important.
Yeah, there's pieces of paper in front of some of you. I'll let you just knock this one down. Meeting agenda, so as we always do, we'll start with consumer voices. We'll then go into the body of the agenda, which today is broken up into 4 parts. We have integrated systems of care, LTSS infrastructure and access, system financing, and state leadership. We'll then continue the discussion on the report preparation process, have public comment, and then Carrie will wrap up the meeting with a summary of recommendations and action steps. Subcommittee schedule. So the next meeting is on January the 27th, and that meeting will be for part 2 of IHSS discussion. Part 1 was held on December the 17th. For those of you who may want a refresher on the part 1 discussion, you can refer to the materials. They are posted on our website, and I'll be making an announcement about our new MPA website. But you can find the materials on there, so if you want to kind of refresh your minds on what part 1 consisted of, that may help you prepare for the part 2 discussion. There's also 3 changes to the schedule that I wanted to point out to everybody. The first is that we have added a January 30th meeting to the schedule for LTSS report writing. Second is that the previous scheduled meeting on February 20th has been moved to February 19th. And that will be an in-person meeting, again, to talk about drafting the LTSS stakeholder report. And then finally, the March meeting has been scheduled for March 10th. And that will be to review the feedback received from the Stakeholder Advisory Committee. And this meeting will be a webinar. Okay. Meeting guidelines. I won't go over the meeting guidelines today since we did that yesterday. However, I do want to say that we will continue to use the colored reminder cards for our presenters, just to make sure that everybody has time to present and that we have sufficient time for discussion in the meeting as well. All right, now, something I am super excited about, our new MPA website. So woohoo, we finally got our new master plan tracing website up and running. The website is fantastic. What I most appreciate about it is when I try to tell people where the MPA website is located, I don't have to go through this long link to get them there. The link is really easy. It's engage.ca.org. It's a great website. It's very intuitive. So what you'll find on there are the meeting of the schedule of the meetings, materials for the meetings, updates about the MPA process. You'll also see information on our webinar Wednesdays posted. So very intuitive, very easy to use. I would love to thank our foundation partners for providing funding for the consultant, Pascal Ross, who helped us develop the website. I'd also like to thank the CDA communications team, Adam Willoughby and Nelson Shea, for helping design the website. So just a fantastic job all around. I also wanted to mention that the list of budget proposals that I talked about in yesterday's meeting has been sent out. So for those of you who subscribe to CDA mailings, you'll have received it. That list will also be on our CDA intranet page under the highlights section, as will the press release that accompanies the launch of our new MPA website. Okay. So that brings us to consumer voices. The first consumer voice will be presented by Maya Altman from the Health Plan of San Mateo. And Maya, did you want to go ahead?
Thank you, Mark. So I'm going to talk about Josephine, who's one of our members. She had been living in a nursing facility for 2 years. Can't hear you, Maya. She's been living like this in a nursing facility for 2 years. She wanted to leave, and she actually wanted to live on the coast. She enrolled in CalMed Connect at HSM. The program is designed to connect the delivery of medical care with LTSS. She gained access to an interdisciplinary care team, and that team helped her find a new home. It took 4 months of planning, but she was able to move to an affordable housing development that had recently opened in Halfmoon Bay. She now has IHSS services, a care manager to help coordinate medical appointments and other important referrals, transportation, and meals. She also has services to help with her strengths and prevent falls. And today she feels independent, and she knows she's not alone. She recently fell, and instead of calling 911, she called her care manager and got to see her doctor quickly. She's in control of her own plan of care, unlike when she was in the nursing home or the exhausting cycle of emergency room visits and hospitalization. Josephine says her new environment feels like freedom. So she's one of our members in our community care service program, which I mentioned briefly yesterday, which is designed to help people move back or stay in the community from nursing home. And there's a description of it included in the packet that went out this morning if you want to read more about it. Both our program and a similar one at Inland Empire Health Plan in Riverside, San Bernardino County. So this is an example of how things should work for consumers, and I just want to show that it's possible. I think our task is that we need to make sure that these kinds of programs are available for everyone. So Marty's going to talk next.
Yeah, that was a success story.
Right.
I thought we had the other side. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Marty Lynch. I work at an organization called Lifelong Medical Care. which was founded as the Over 60 Health Center by the Great Panthers. So I wanted to tell the story of one of my board members, actually, and this is a older woman who had had several hip replacements because they had come loose and she had to get them redone, that sort of thing, but managed to get around fairly well onto canes and used transportation, including public transportation, did amazingly well, was a fantastic advocate. She was a member of a health plan, so not Medi-Cal, and the health plan will go unnamed, but a large one, I'm just going to say. Had been a public employee, so she had some pension resources and such. Helene basically had a fairly serious stroke at some point in her life. She was just about 80 at the time she had it. And I just went through the process of seeing how she could get the medical care she needed in the health plan, but the health plan doctors and social workers had a very difficult time connecting her to personal care services. She wasn't IHSS eligible, mind you, but still, finding personal care for this woman who had serious functional disabilities was extremely hard. At the end of the day, what we had to do to find her personal care, and some of you from the independent living movement will appreciate this, she was personal friends with a woman named Judy Human, who's one of the founders of the independent living movement. Judy shared some personal information on her caregivers to allow Helene to get some help in her home. Now, clearly, that's not going to work for hundreds of thousands of people, and it just reminded me to this day of that very basic level of integration that we need between the primary medical care side and the building block of LTSS services, which is IHSS or personal care. So Helene's story, she's going to do better. She would do better after we're done this work. Right, Maya?
That's right.
Yeah.
Should we segue into it?
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, well, thank you, Maya and Marty. This is Sarah Steenhausen. I am going to now provide a segue into the next 4 parts of our agenda. And just as a little bit of an overview of these 4 parts, they're, they all relate to one another, but I would say it's important to understand that they're all separate and unique components. So this first mega section is going to focus on the issue of inflation that Maya and Marty just showed, case examples of. After that point, we will have time to discuss the recommendations that have come forward from the committee members and into general buckets, and then we will go on to our second big bucket issue, which is a small little issue of infrastructure and access that Lydia will be helping present on as well. And then we're going to talk about another small issue, system financing. Now, this isn't the perspective of financing from how the individual pays. It's more about how the state budget is structured and state, county, local fiscal arrangements. The final part of the content of the agenda will be focused on the issue of leadership at the state level and, kind of as a cross-cutting issue that has come forward through the recommendation. So with all of that said, I think it's pretty clear to everybody that that's a lot to cover in the span of time that we have. The danger is that we take too long on some items and don't give other items their due time, and all of these are important issues. So Maya and Marty and I, when we planned the agenda, tried very hard with Carrie as well to think through how can we be succinct and get into enough detail to highlight the really critical policy issues, but leave all the time we can for the discussion. So are we going to be presenting and giving you a comprehensive background on every single issue here? No. And that's because we don't have the time, but we know that if we give you the high level, I think everybody here has enough of the content background to be able to discuss the recommendation. But that said, if there are questions as we're talking, please raise your hand. questions and clarifying remarks are fine, but we want to present the issues and the recommendations and then have a big chunk of time for discussion. So with that, I will start now. We wanted to start with defining what do we mean by integration. And I think it's important to note that integration really can mean many things. There's many varying degrees of integration. But the concept behind integration is to address the problems like Jolene, that Marty raised, where an individual has difficulty accessing services across both the healthcare and the long-term services and supports continuum, as well as behavioral health and other services that they need to remain independent or to transition from a facility. But because of the very fragmented nature of our funding system, people cannot access what they need. So you have a very siloed system. The concept of integration is really enables an individual to access both medical care and LTSS, as well as some of the other services we discussed, by working through a lead entity that is responsible for either providing or contracting for or coordinating the care. Now, as I said, there's many different forms of integration. There's different levels, different funding streams. The three general categories are the integration of Medicare and Medi-Cal for dual eligible individuals. We have, as you know, over 1 million, about almost 1.5 million duals in the state, among the most vulnerable population in our state. So the integration of Medicare, which covers primarily health care, and Medi-Cal, which is the wraparound, and the LTSS, is a really significant issue for people who are dual eligible, if it's done the right way, and if it's done with the person truly at the center. But you also can have integration of Medi-Cal covered services. So for example, the Medi-Cal managed care plans traditionally only covered healthcare services. And more recently, since starting in, with the coordinated care initiative and a little sooner with some caveats, the Medi-Cal managed care plan started to provide other home and community-based services. So you saw some integration of LTSS and Medi-Cal managed care. So that's integration within Medi-Cal. But then third, you can have integration within Medicare. So that's for people who are on Medicare only, who are 65 or older, or who are disabled and meet the requirements, but they're not eligible for Medi-Cal. So there are some new initiatives to try and integrate healthcare services with non-Medicare, traditionally non-Medicare services, so that services are better integrated for the Medicare population. That's a very high-level bucket of integration. The most integrated entities are those like PACE, the Program for All-Inclusive Care for the Elderly, that combines all of the funding for Medicare and Medi-Cal into one bucket and is able to deliver and coordinate all the services that individual needs. So, any questions about what integration is before we move on? Okay.
Just that paper you shared was really tremendous, that was published in October. I highly recommend it if everybody has to watch it from SCAN.
Okay, one of the links. You can see the links that were provided to the handouts today for some more background. So it's important to understand that California has endeavored for years at the local and state level to do successful integration. I'm not going to run through the number of initiatives. Starting in the early 90s with the long-term care integration pilot project, that's a mouthful, which I would venture to say really was a county initiative. San Diego and Ellen was very involved with that. There were a number of different legislative measures that really ultimately didn't pass. We had proposals from the Schwarzenegger administration that didn't have the legislative support it needed. And then finally, it wasn't until the introduction of the coordinated care initiative that the state sought to really start figuring out how it could do more integrated service delivery. I'm not going to get into the coordinated care initiative because Maya is going to now present on many of the issues connected to integration relative to dual eligible individuals right now that were impacted by the coordinated care initiative and that really also connect to the current proposal, the new word for CalLink, that long name. The healthier California for all. So with that, Maya, thank you for providing us with this overview.
Okay, thank you. I'm just gonna say, I'm gonna call it Elaine because I can't remember the other name, so, I feel like, formerly known as Prince.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm gonna start off talking about Medicare and Medi-Cal integration. And, first of all, I just want to say that, why are dual eligible, people qualify for both Medicare and Medi-Cal such a high priority? And first, the first answer is we're talking about large numbers of people. So the numbers that you see on the slide are the numbers Mary Cantwell shared with us last month. We have 2.1 million people. I'm having computer problems, so I'm just going to wing this in my notes. We have about 2.1 million people who are either seniors and people with disabilities or dual eligible. And 2/3 of those folks, 1.4 million people are dual eligible. Also, dual eligible, at least we find locally in our county, they're among the most vulnerable members we have. So, for example, in our county, most of the people with serious mental illness are dual eligible. So clearly, this is a group that we really have to focus on. Now, I'm not going to talk a lot about the Coordinated Care Initiative. I do want to say a few things about it, and I was having lunch yesterday with Christina and Brandy, and, we talked about, what went right, what went wrong. It was a massive initiative. I think the state, I think everybody probably took on more than we were ready for. It was a massive system change. And it was also, in the scheme of things, it didn't have much time to develop because, I don't know if you'll recall, but, year to year, it was on the chopping block. There was a poison pill in the legislation. So from the plan perspective, we didn't know if it was going to be around the following year. And then at some point, IHSS pulled out and changed things dramatically. So it was really only last year when the program was authorized for 3 years that we finally had some stability in the program. So I think there's still a lot to learn from this Coordinated Care Initiative and Cal Medi-Connect. But be that as it may, the state has moved on, and in Cal-AIM, they are proposing to end the Cal Medi-Connect program at the end of 2022 and go to something, they're basically requiring all the plans that are in the Coordinated Care Initiative to develop what are called dual eligible special needs plans, which is we formally call them DSNPs, and they are part of the Medicare Advantage program. So they are focused on people who are dually eligible for Medicare and Medi-Cal. So the state is saying, okay, everybody in the Cal Medi-Connect program or all the plans in that program will have to develop DSNPs by 2023, and hopefully there will be some kind of seamless transition. That's always a very scary word, transition, to this new model. And then all the plans that don't and that aren't in the Coordinated Care Initiative will have to also develop these things by 2023 as well. That's the current timing. That may change. So the concern that we have, these NIPs, they're designated by the federal government. They are plans applied and approved by CMS. It is another way to provide Medicare and Medi-Cal integration. The concern is that you have lots of plans that will just apply and put up a shingle and say, we offer a DSNP. And many of them don't even offer Medi-Cal. So the first recommendation is we have what's up there is called aligned enrollment. And that means, because the state has the power to do this, that the state has to say, this DSNP is okay because it's got Medi-Cal and Medicare, and we need that in this area. But this DSNP over here, we don't agree with because we have a system in California where this is where the plans, people get their Medi-Cal coverage. And unless that's done, you're going to have a proliferation of DSNPs that aren't really offering integrated care at all. And again, the state has the power to do this because they have to provide a letter to any DSNP that applies to CMS saying that they support the application. The second related challenge is what are called lookalikes. And these are Medicare Advantage plans. They don't even, they're not even, SNP plans. But they intentionally market to dual eligibles through brokers. And this happens a lot in LA. There are about 90,000 people, duals, are on these plans right now. And, again, they're not offering integrated care. And CMS and the state need to work on solutions to limit these plans. The goal is to have an integrated option in every part of the state, but a real integrated option, not just willy-nilly, whatever insurance plans decide to offer. And then finally, we're recommending fully integrated plans, and that means plans that not only offer Medicare, Medi-Cal, they have behavioral health, they have LTSS, have true integrated services. Of course, that depends a lot on the state allowing plans to integrate. So, it's connected with the work we're doing here. And the reason why the master plan on aging recommendations are really important here is because there's going to be a lot of political pressure on the state from insurance plans to let whatever insurance plans want to play in California. And so I think it'll be really important to.
Well, I'm sorry. I'm getting a text from Kevin Prendeville saying it's hard to hear Maya on the phone. I don't know if you guys can do anything.
Yeah, I just got a message from the captioner too.
Yeah, I'm speaking in my mind. I can't hold any closer than this. Only pretty loud in here.
Yeah. And she's right next to one too, yeah.
And I'm right next to a phone, yeah. Unless other electronic
I think
stuff
it's
is.
the room, because I had the same issue with calling you a meeting here, so I can just.
Oh, really?
Okay, we'll do our
best.
All right. Thank
Okay.
you.
Sorry, Kevin. You've heard this all before. So what we're gonna do is Marty and I are gonna present for about 15 minutes, and then we're gonna have, another 15 minutes or so. We're gonna have close to an hour for discussion, so we're gonna leave plenty of time for discussion. So we thought we'd just move through this first section all at once. So the next slide is, integrating institutional long-term care into Medi-Cal managed care. So there is a state proposal, as people are aware, to have all plans have long-term care cards in by 2021. It would be non-duals by 2021 and duals by 2023. Why the breakup, I'm not really sure, but that's the plan so far. And, just to give a little bit of history, 26 counties have always, for many years, had long-term care cards in, so all the county organized health systems like us, Medi-Cal.
Can you explain what long-term care carbon means for those who might not be familiar?
So that means that the plans would be the payer for institutional long-term care. So in many plans right now, they are responsible for maybe the first month, but after that, people switch over to the fee-for-service system as a payer. As I was saying, there are about 26 counties now having cards in, including LA. So I don't have the exact numbers, but I think it's between 60 and 80% of the people in long-term care facilities are covered by managed care. I think the potential here is that and I'll talk about some of the caveats in a minute, but the potential there's a great potential for rebalancing. And by rebalancing, I mean that there's an intentional policy on the part of the state, which doesn't exist right now, but we're recommending that the state should do this. It's an intentional policy to increase long-term services support, have a more robust system of LTSS, but at the same time decrease the use of institutional care. And the two have to go hand in hand. It's my strong belief that you can't just keep adding programs and then keep increasing institutional care. Plus, that doesn't, fulfill the Olmstead goal of reducing institutional care as much as possible. And again, it is possible, and the examples that some plans like ours and then Empire have done, and I've started to work on rebalancing. So the first recommendation is, as it says there, is really having a strong vision for rebalancing. The second recommendation, I'm actually going to go to the third next, but which is the non-medical needs. So in CalAIM, there's a proposal for something called in lieu of services. And without getting into the jargon of what in lieu of services means, it's basically a tool for plans to use to provide non-medical services, things that may, and also things that may not be Medi-Cal benefits currently, to develop more alternatives for people. And it could be, and the state has, specifically said that enhanced care management and in lieu of services should apply to people who are at risk of nursing home placement. So we need to, I think, embrace that recommendation and expand it, support it. And it is a significant tool to help plans reduce the use of long-term care and provide more alternatives. It also would help plans develop some infrastructure and make investments in local communities. And I don't think it's sufficient on its own, and Lydia will talk about other infrastructure investments that are needed, but it's an important step. And then finally, the caveat is that plans have to be ready. And there needs to be a robust readiness process. There needs to be to ensure that the plans have contracts in place with nursing facilities, that they know how to access long-term services and support, and that there's network advocacy, there's care coordination standards, and access to services and support. So those all go together in a package, but that's another package of our recommendations. Okay, next slide. The next slide, yeah. So finally, this is at least for the Medi-Cal focus part. We're talking about integrating home and community-based services to Medi-Cal managed care. And what I want to focus on here is really IHSS, which I know is a very controversial subject, and people have lots of strong opinions on IHSS. There was, I think, again, from what I know, having worked in San Mateo County for 20 plus years, 25 years, and both at the county and on the health plan side, there are folks who, for whom the current IHSS program structure doesn't look well. So these are mainly people who cannot direct their own care because they have cognitive issues, behavioral health issues, substance use issues. So as a plan, what we did in the early days of the Coordinated Care Initiative, we contracted with a program called Homebridge in San Francisco, which is an IHSS provider. They're under that so-called contract mode in IHSS. And they have, they spend a lot, they invest in training staff and supervising staff closely. And we have worked with them to have a fair number of, not a large number, but people that really needed intensive help access IHSS. And it worked quite well. What happened was when the state dropped IHSS out of the Coordinated Care Initiative, and then responsibly went back to the county, they didn't renew that contract because it's expensive, and we subsidized it in some part, and the county couldn't afford it. Right now, San Francisco is the only place in the state that has this kind of program under IHSS. And I don't know if, either in the IHSS recommendations or in our recommendations on integration, we want to recommend that we don't, bite off the whole IHSS program, but maybe do a pilot of people who are in that category that cannot direct their own care and carve them into the health plans. And let the health plans work with contractors like IHSS contractors like the Homebridge to provide services to these folks. The second recommendation in this area is information sharing the appropriate information sharing and care coordination, between IHSS and the plan. I think, once the IHSS was carved back out, people went back to their own silos in many counties. And, I think any progress that had been made in some counties, stopped. And there's a need for a strong state voice saying, no, you know, plans and, counties, you will cooperate on this, and you will, you know, try to share information and coordinate care. Along, you know, I think, Marty's story is a last example. Somebody, if that person had been eligible for IHSS. And then again, this is a package deal. So, clearly plans have to be ready for this, for integration of any, LTSS or home community-based services. There need to be access standards, there needs to be, proper reporting that's been difficult under the, coordinated care initiative. And there needs to be more evaluations, Caregram led a great evaluation more on the Medicare side, but on the, LTSS side, I think there's a lot more work to do, to evaluate and learn. And then finally, quality, you know, one of our recommendations is that, you know, we talked yesterday about it's all about outcomes, and so that that LTSS quality outcomes be developed, and there are some, right, and included in any program, that the programs be, you know, accredited appropriately, that and I also want to make a pitch for Susan's not here today, but clearly Alzheimer's is another area where there needs to be at least one quality related outcome of Alzheimer's. There needs to be the kinds of access, assessment, care plans, you know, really Alzheimer's, the plans need to be Alzheimer's experts as well. So, I'll stop there.
Yeah. I just wanted to kind of add on to what Maya was saying. This is Sarah. This gets into the whole issue of managed long-term services and supports, what Maya was just talking about. So many of the people who are either dual eligible or Medi-Cal only, if they're either not eligible for CalMedicNet or they chose not to enroll, they still would be required under the coordinated care initiative in those counties to enroll in Medi-Cal managed care for provision of certain long-term services and supports. Right now, it's CVAC, MSSP for a little while longer, and nursing facility care. But what we don't know, and this is what gets to this evaluation issue, we don't know, since CCI has been implemented, how this managed long-term services and support system has worked for the enrollees. We've learned so much about CalMedicNet and how people are accessing care coordination, how they are, or the challenges in accessing LTSS, what's working, what are some best practices. We don't know anything on the managed LTSS side, and I think that there's at least about 900,000 people who are impacted by managed LTSS. We have about 110,000 people in CalMedicNet, so we don't know a lot about the experience of those managed LTSS only population. And that's these people that's this program that Maya's talking about, both across home and community-based services and the long-term institutional care. I just think there's an opportunity to learn a lot. And one of the recommendations that was submitted was, let's evaluate how this has worked and then roll out phase in the implementation of a statewide skilled nursing carbon once we have a sense of the vision for it and how it ensures that people can access services across the continuum based on evaluation findings. So that's all I wanted to add on to what Maya was saying. And now I believe we're going to turn over to Marty, and then we're going to have discussion for quite a while.
That is the planning council.
The planning council, should we do planning council first?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, I mean, do Marty, but then we'll do the
Okay,
planning.
got it. Okay.
Thank you. Kevin, Heather's on the phone, I hope you can hear by now. So, it's ironic that I'm going to talk about the Medicare population who are not duals. Most of my professional life has been spent working with low-income older people. But we very much heard that the governor and the department wants a master plan on aging that will speak to all parts of the older population in the state of California. And we know that, in fact, many of our older population are not dual, so millions and millions. So that we need to have an approach for folks who are on Medicare in this integration question. By the way, Maya's comments about IHSS pilots and that reminded me that in listening to the Democratic debates, Medicare for all, Mayor Pete came up with the idea of Medicare for all who want it, right? And I've almost started to think of this as integration of care for those who want it. No one's got anybody who does not want integration, but for those who want it and see themselves needing it, it's a fantastic thing. Okay, couple of ideas on the Medicare population. So, many of you probably know that Medicare itself has been making headway into the chronic care world in the last number of years, starting quite some number of years ago, I'd say, with issues like diabetes education and management, but more recently adding chronic care management and adding the ability for Medicare Advantage plans to offer some level of LTSS services as part of their benefit as well. And for the sake of this discussion, I'm going to divide the Medicare population into those who choose to join Medicare Advantage, those who remain in fee-for-service. So we think of the Medicare Advantage population, there are now some options for Medicare Advantage plans to add at least limited LTSS services as part of a chronic care approach. Now, there's beginning to be some research, and I don't think we attached it, but I can get it to folks to put out there, that shows how many plans are doing some of that activity, offering some LTSS services, right? We think there's a role for the state. The recommendation is that the state could play a role in encouraging Medicare Advantage plans to offer those LTSS services. Now, I totally admit that we're working on what that could look like. Is that the governor's bully pulpit? Is it some kind of marketing, regulatory, financial incentives to Medicare Advantage plans that the state does not play ball with today? We think there's some action that can be thought about there to encourage the plans to begin providing an LTSS benefit, even if it's a minimal LTSS benefit. The other side of that population, of course, is the people that remain in fee-for-service, Medicare. Often, not always, but often those folks have some kind of Medigap coverage that they might buy from AARP, they might have related to CalPERS or their pension plan, but often some kind of Medigap plan that helps pay for copays and deductibles and things that Medicare itself doesn't pay for. Now, some states, and Minnesota is the best example we have, are experimenting with the idea of Medigap plans offering what I'm just going to call a skinny LTSS benefit.
Front end.
Yeah, small LTSS benefit on top of their Medigap plan. Now, different states have different, what I've learned so far is different states have different insurance regulatory abilities. So some states might be able to actually have that added to a Medigap plan. Others might have to do it as a separate plan that could be bought into by the consumer. But in any case, again, we think there's some room for the state to take some leadership in encouraging the insurance industry to get a little further down the road with LTSS benefits that would be integrated into the medical care coverage. Medicare Advantage, it's pretty clear, that's a health plan, so you could see how that could be integrated. Medigap, it might be a skinny benefit on top of the regular Medigap plan. I'm going to ask Carrie if she wants to say anything for a minute, because when she was in House Ways and Means, she actually worked on some of this stuff. So, Carrie, you want to add?
Sure.
Yeah, so, in terms of kind of the federal landscape of what's going on with Medicare, I would say that, LTSS is not on it's not really the next thing on the list to be funded. So if we pass HR 3, which is supposed to save a lot of money with prescription drug negotiation, the thing that's on the list to then fund with that saved money is dental vision hearing. So that's part of HR 3, the bill. But there are some interesting proposals, as Marty was saying. Another one, in addition to what Minnesota's doing with Medigap, there was some interest, the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee wrote a letter to NAIC asking him to look into options for adding LTSS benefits as one of the standardized Medigap plans.
What NAIC is?
Oh, National Association of Insurance Commissioners, and they're kind of in charge of supplemental Medicare benefits. So, there's some interest, there's also a lot of pushback in terms of what it would do to Medigap, but the interesting thing is, Medigap kind of competes with Medicare Advantage. And if Medicare Advantage could provide these special supplemental benefits, there should be some interest on Medigap part to be able to compete with that. So, that's one issue. The other thing that I think is really interesting are some of these proposals, and I think Bipartisan Policy Center came out with the best one, which is saying, why don't we give the authority to the Secretary of Health and Human Services? If we can prove or have good evidence that a certain kind of limited LTSS benefit is going to save money. And so they did actuarial analysis and found, in their case, this is the one they picked, 7 days of medically tailored meals for a certain population post-discharge in these certain situations would save Medicare $50 million or something like that. This is all actuarial analysis. So what about just a proposal to give the Secretary authority to add that to Medicare Part B? So that's another thing that's been floating around and has some bipartisan support on the Medicare level that I think California could do something to push.
So let me wrap.
Put a bow on it.
Let me wrap with one statement. So clearly, it's easier for us it's easier for us at this table combined with DHCS to talk about tools and talk about what we can do on LTSS, and manage LTSS, that sort of thing. It's harder to think about what the state's role is with Medicare. And the recommendation here is that we not give up that field, but that we do have a strategy, an overall integration strategy that includes that population. Thank you.
Mike, you want, Yeah, so just one more slide, and then we'll be done with this section. So, our final recommendation in this area is has to do with oversight, so kind of moving into the governance and oversight section. So this recommendation, actually came from the, California Collaborative for, LTSS. And, but it is it's modeled after something that was set up in, Massachusetts to oversee their dual demo. And the critical thing is that the planning council would involve representatives from across different organizations, kind of like districts, and the consumers and advocates and health plans and providers. And we start breaking down the silos, because there are silos of oversight and leadership that we need to start breaking down. So our proposal is to charge this council with more than just Medi-Cal, but to oversee LTSS across populations and try to make headway for integration between health and LTSS for everyone in California. So that's our presentation.
And I can summarize.
Yeah, well, thank you very much, Maya. I know you did an amazing job covering a lot of material in a really succinct manner. Just to refresh our memories, way back when we started here, Maya talked about the issue of integrating Medicare and Medi-Cal, and this is kind of the lessons learned from the Cal MediConnect program and what some of you thinking was about what the opportunities might be for this next phase of integration for dual eligibles, and specifically looking at aligned enrollment, fully integrated plans, addressing the challenges of the lookalikes, and really having the state flesh out the standards and requirements for dual eligible special needs plans, and the real need for leadership in that level at the state level. And then when we look over at the issue of integrating institutional long-term care into Medi-Cal managed care, the main themes that came up are the need for long-term goals and a vision for rebalancing, looking at addressing, as Maya talked about, the non-medical needs or the in lieu of services, as well as plan readiness. This is quite a fast timeline to transition all of the counties to covering skilled nursing care. It's operationally very challenging. We learned a lot from the coordinated care initiative, so those are some considerations. In the next slide, Maya talked about a lot of the issues pertaining to the provision of home and community-based services under the Medi-Cal managed care plan. And I think this also ties into the need for a vision and an overall strategy, because we know that community-based adult services are Medi-Cal managed care benefits. MSSP was, but it no longer is. What is managed LTSS if it's one program in the community and institutional? So there's a need for kind of a vision for what that looks like. The need for access standards for home and community-based services, evaluation, and data, so that we know what's worked and who's getting what, and then the quality metrics that Maya talked about. So, and then Marty talked about the need to look at the Medicare plans, like we just talked about, and then, of course, the implementation council. So that's a lot to talk about, and luckily we have about an hour for this section of discussion. Right? Yes, I think. So 55 minutes. So with that, and the blurting out of a lot of information at once, who has, Ellen, perfect.
Great, well, that was really invigorating, and thank you for that discussion. There's just so many things to say about this topic. One of the things that occurs to me, having worked in this area for 20 plus years, is it's a dream, it's a vision. And some of us still have it, that integrated care is possible in California. Back in the days of 1040, at that point I was asked to fix IHSS. And there was no real fix for IHSS. It's a difficult program to administer, and it's a standalone program. So at that point, we started getting on the bandwagon for AB 1040 and integration. Now with CalAIM, our incentives are still not aligned. If IHSS is outside and the other home and community-based care programs are outside the CalAIM system, then one entity will have responsibility for community-based care and IHSS, and another will have responsibility for skilled. And so the same entity will still not be responsible. IHSS financing is beyond complex, and probably there's a handful of people that fully understand how that works and how it could work with realignment. So I think that one of the things with the governor's master plan is to try to address IHSS. I really believe that one of our recommendations needs to be to take more time and to figure out whether or not IHSS and other home and community-based care plans can be integrated. For a long time, we thought the county could do it. And now with Cal MediConnect and CCI, that moved into the managed care plans. So in San Diego, I know things really changed when IHSS came out of the system, and we really had some concerns about how that was going to work. And, you know, they can't share information without individual consent. And so I think that is a challenge. One of the things with the in lieu of services is that could be really promising. But I think back to care plan option services, and only one entity in San Diego really funds that. And that's, care plan option services are the ability for.
Yeah, so the difference between in lieu of service, care plan options. Care plan options left it up to the plan to invest. And there was no, so for example, we pay for assisted living for people coming out of nursing homes if that's the level of care they want or need. And there's no way for us to get that reflected in our cost reports, and so it's something that we can't sustain over time. In lieu of services would eventually let the plans recover some of those costs so that it is sustainable. That's the major difference. It's a much more sustainable tool than care plan options. Is that clear?
Yeah, it is clear, except that the care plan options was to be the way that the health plans could bring in additional services and supports. So I understand that it wasn't funded, and that would be one strong recommendation, that the in lieu of services is funded, and it's clear as to what it could actually cover. The other thing, I know we're gonna talk about the integration at the state level a little bit later, and I think that'll be very exciting. I guess I'll just finish up by saying that I really, just being even able to have this discussion is so exciting. And to be able to envision, again, a California where these services are integrated. There's nothing like IHSS anywhere else in the nation, and we have so much of our money in that program. Our staff have worked so hard in the counties to do a good job with IHSS assessments and service, but they don't provide care coordination or wraparound, and there simply isn't the time, and that's not their mandate. Okay, thank you.
Good afternoon, Nina Wilder, Harlow, AOC, so I really appreciate the discussion. I actually just have a question, and I'm not sure if this is the right place to put it, but I'm curious about what the discussion we might have around an IHSS buy-in in some way for someone who's been normally qualified for IHSS doesn't buy it. And I don't know where we would plan to do that discussion, but just putting it out there.
This is Nancy from it's just a side also, there's.
There's IHSS with a share of cost. So it's not exactly the same as IHSS buy-in, but there are some technical options.
I think.
I could keep talking.
Oh, somebody else has a card? Oh, yes, okay, Karen. And then,
Can't see that far.
well, I don't have one.
Hi, Karen, County. Thank you. I think the conversation is really interesting, and especially regarding IHSS, which I know very well, in my county. And, I agree that there needs to be more, care coordination. The social workers and the staff in county IHSS want to do the work you're talking about. We know, we recognize the need of, individuals who are not able to, correct their own care, cognitive impairments, et cetera. What we need is more funding. The caseloads are enormous right now. And on everything, it always comes back to discussions about funding.
Got you, Jeff, after Lydia. So Jeff after Lydia.
And Sherry.
And Terry, and then there's somebody on the phone too.
No, I didn't that.
Hi, Lydia Misleading. I was a little confused about the new proposals under CalAIM for the DSNP. It sounds like what you were describing is that the Medi-Cal managed care plan, DSNP, would not necessarily be the only option then for people who are enrolled in that plan. They could choose a non-Medi-Cal plan to be in every DSNP? Okay, so I had a different, is that correct? Okay, Mike's gonna answer.
Yeah. That's what could happen. And that's what, if the state doesn't regulate, I use that term loosely, regulate the market.
Okay.
An insurance company can offer a DSNP without, and they can enroll people that are on Medi-Cal, but not get Medi-Cal through that plan. I know it's crazy, but they can do that.
Okay, so I've got to get the best.
But can I just say that a DSNP by definition is a Medicare Advantage plan,
Right.
which the federal government regulates. The state, however, has some control over the Medicaid dollars that might flow to that plan. But a plan can take only the Medicare side of it if it chooses, and that's your concern, I think.
Right.
And just to note, with DSNP, there are different levels of integration. You can have the regular DSNP level, which is just really a contractual arrangement. You can have highly integrated DSNP, which is a little higher level, and then you can have fully integrated DSNP, which is the whole kit and caboodle, and that's really the more true integration model. So, Lydia?
Life is complicated.
Okay, so two experiences. One, my personal experience, having just enrolled in Medicare, so I passed that magic age. So I'm living on the government dole now, everyone. I'm very happy about that. I know. Just my little joke. It's just my little joke. It is so flippin' complicated, and I got a Part D penalty because I signed up 3 months late for Part D, not realizing you have to do it within 90 days, not da, da, da. So it is so flippin' complicated today for the Medicare person, let alone a dual, but to deal with two systems that are complicated. And now you're going to say that we're going to integrate individual for-profit D-SNPs with the Medi-Cal managed care plan when there's no relationship with them and not enough funding to do care coordination between the two. I think that is a nightmare waiting to happen. Will make Cal Medi-Connect look like a walk in the park. So I strongly recommend that. I strongly support that recommendation. And by the way, with the Medicare Advantage ability to add LTSS, Anthem in California is the only health plan right now that has added, for example, adult-based services. They've also added nutrition, which I strongly support. We've done some research on that. Extremely important for post-hospitalization, but even pre-hospitalization. Anyone's nutrition is important. We are not getting referrals. They have limited the ADHC benefit, everybody, to 1 day per week. 1 day per week. For Medicare Advantage, where they've added some LTSS benefit. So right now, my impression is it's not taking hold, across the country very strongly. It's a long-term project. They need to have actuarial data. But the point I want to raise is that first one I raised, mass chaos, I think is going to happen if that isn't regulated as you described, Maya, for the consumer. And then number two, with adding these benefits, right now, honestly, I'm not seeing them more than a way to try to attract some people and not really deliver the services. These plans do not understand LTSS, period. Period, full stop. They don't understand it. So that's what bothers me, that we didn't have the CalAID group include an LTSS, but a subgroup that could raise some of these issues. Apologize for my voice. I have more to say, but I'll give up my time to.
Well, we have time, so.
That was my point on that.
Oh, yeah, that's right, and then,
So before I make my comment on a personal level, as I started listening to this, I realized I really need to get my darn Medicare Advantage plan in Braille so I can read the whole darn thing. And I'm going to do that. So it's kind of sadly ironic that we're having some of the same discussions we had when Cal Medi-Connect was being proposed. IHSS, I don't know what to say. I mean, there's so much angst in the disability community for very good reason about having IHSS become part of managed care. There's no doubt about that. On the other hand, I have been with an advisory committee on some national health care, or one national health care company that appeared to understand the general thrust of what the importance of IHSS was and how it had to be administered in order to make it the life-sustaining program that it is. And I really think that, let's face it, we're not going to have any kind of one-payer system in this country. We're just not. I don't care how many people want it. We're not. And with the resource limitations we have, the IHSS program is becoming more and more burdensome, in terms of a taxpayer program. So I don't know. I'm not sure that the only way we can, make the IHSS program sustainable is through managed care. And I agree that somehow or other we need to have a very robust pilot, which very robust managed care pilot to show whether properly administered, the programs can be worked, well in a managed care context, because it hasn't shown that yet, but I think it needs to be.
Great. Maybe after Anna, we'll go to Donna. Is it live?
This is Anna, thank you. Yeah, thanks for bringing back a lot of memories. So somehow I forgot. They're traumatic.
Well,
Traumatic memories.
anytime.
So I need some clarification, because this is not really my daily work area. So we have the Medicare Advantage plans that are currently just for Medicare. And then, with the CalAIM proposal, with the dual eligible special needs plans, what did you call them? C-SNP. Okay, so is there state standards, or is that part of what we're recommending? That the state develop standards to say if you're gonna play in California, you have to take Medi-Cal? Or, I mean, because not everyone's gonna be a Medi-Medi. So there's gonna be a need for certain people in Medicare to get access, right? But then if you are a Medi-Medi, those plans need to be able to accept them?
You want to talk?
Yeah, let me clarify a little bit.
It's, I'm sorry, it's so incredibly complicated. I did not design this program, but, but yeah, see, the standard, we're recommending that the state have standards.
Right.
And one simple standard is, you have to enroll in a plan that has both your Medicare and Medicaid. Not enroll one plan that has your Medicare and another plan that has your Medicaid, because then there's no integration. You don't even know, if we have, I'll give you an example. We had somebody, years ago, I just remember who, we just have the Medicaid side, this is for now, Cal Medicaid. This Medicaid pays for, the deductibles and the co-pays. They might do wraparound services, transportation, some DME. Well, this person was in Medicare fee-for-service, had been to the emergency room 100 times a year. We didn't know that. I mean, then we kind of researched it back, because we don't have any of the Medicare information. And this person was crying out for coordination, and, if they get their, it's just disintegration, as Eric just said. If you have Medicare, I go here for my Medicare, there for my Medicaid, it's crazy.
Okay,
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so.
Okay, so I like that idea. This is Anna again, of having some minimum standards. And it sounds like just having access to a plan that would, for Medi-Medis, right, that have these minimum standards. So if you are a Medi-Medi, you enroll in one plan that coordinates care. Okay, so the next piece I wanted to bring up was the CalAIM in lieu of services. And really trying to think through that, because there's so much opportunity there.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, that is a huge, place for many of us that are working on social determinants of health and kind of doing the LTSS piece can play. My concern is requiring, that they actually work collaboratively with organizations.
Yeah.
Because we keep on pushing, work collaboratively with local partners to get this work done, and we don't see that play out necessarily. Right, that's been our experience anyway. So can part of our recommendation be that you're not just taking all these limited services in-house, but you actually require to partner with organizations that are providing this array of services that are outside what is typically, paid for through Medi-Cal?
We should just have you guys sit
We
down.
need a couple of mics.
So, I think that is a reasonable recommendation. I know that is being argued about in, some of the CalAIM workers right now, that's staff, those workers, and, the problem is the state says it cannot require plans to contract with anybody. But I think the state really needs to think hard about how to make it happen, because the counties are really concerned. So the counties that have whole person care and, the behavioral health departments, they all have the exact same concern. So I would say that the state, if they can't absolutely require, there needs to be all sorts of incentives put in place at the very least. And secondly, you know, I know this is hard to say, but local plans, are governed, their members are, the board members are appointed by the board of supervisors. If you get the board of supervisors, and you get on, and you get on those plans, you know, they are potentially, they are locally controlled. It's just taking that step and getting on the board of a local plan and telling them what they need to do. Marty's a board member.
I'm a board member of the Almy Alliance, but I want to say to your point that, as the Alliance started looking at the health home demonstration and the whole person care part of the last ballot, some of our board members said, we really want to make sure you contract with community organizations to build up that care coordination infrastructure, not just do it inside the plan. So the plan did, in fact, come up with a strategy that included both. They both needed some internal infrastructure, but then they also brought on a number of outside community-based organization contractors. I don't know, you know, what the HCS can do and not do in terms of requirements, but I would say in the medical world, there's certainly something called network adequacy, where the state judges whether your network of providers is adequate. I, of course, wonder whether there's something that could be done in this area around network adequacy that would be helpful.
Right, so actually, that's that recommendation that was up on the screen about access standards is exactly trying to get to that point, Marty, which is up there, you can see that. Ensuring that there's a core set of services that are defined as, required services in the contracts for these SNPs or whatever plan you're talking about, whether it be a managed LTSS plan or what have you. Because right now, Lydia can attest to, with CBAS, CBAS is a Medi-Cal managed care benefit statewide, but that's a little tricky when you only have CBAS centers in 30 of the 58 counties. If we had access standards, it's a tough one. Maya and I have talked about this because you can't require plans to open up CBAS centers. So it's hard, but if you have those standards, it's kind of a, this gets to the issue of infrastructure planning that we'll talk about a little later, but I think it is something important to consider. Lydia may have a comment after Maya, and then I know we have Donna on the phone too.
And Karen on the phone.
Okay, so just sparks another idea that we could put in those access standards. Yes, you guys that you have to have expertise in LTSS, whoever you contract with, you know, and community-based expertise. There are ways you can, so that, for example, we contract with Institute on Aging, you know, which is our local LTSS organization in the Texas Bay Area. So I think there are ways to massage those access standards to get at that issue that they really need to contract with the local experts.
Great. Okay, so now let's go.
I think Carrie was very.
Okay, we can let's let the people on the phone.
Donna and Karen who are on the wall, and then Carrie.
I know, me too. I got points to make.
Donna, okay, Karen, you're up.
Thank you. And I'm sorry I'm not there, but I'm sparing you all my germs. I'm really concerned about revisiting the conversation about any kind of carve-in of IHSS into managed care. We've gone through this for years. It really just takes all of the energy out of the room. It divides partners that could be otherwise working really successfully together. There are a lot of other ways, I think, to build case management and counseling and other kinds of things that had been done under the old supported individual provider, otherwise known as the supported IP construct that had been set up under the counties for a number of years. Consumers, by and large, really protest very strongly about having IHSS put under managed care. any kind of a limited carve-out is going to create all kinds of flack that I don't think we need to go through when we've done that for so many years and we've learned so many lessons. And I think it divides really good partnerships that can move forward on other kinds of things by just having to respond to the concerns that are going to come out if this surfaces as a recommendation. So I want to be really clear that that I think this is something that should not be in the recommendations that are put forward in the report.
Yeah, one more.
Peter and Marty and then Carrie and Anna.
I'll go with Sharon, and I think we really need to acknowledge that there's a lot of fear from the community. It was loud and clear, and I've kind of, I've been involved in LTSS for many years, both as a consumer and as in, working in the system as well, and there's a lot of fear. And the IHSS issue really stopped a lot of other things from happening, and we have to acknowledge that, okay? And in some cases, there are benefits too, and we have to acknowledge that too. So whatever next steps we take, remember, in 1974, when IHSS was created, it was supposed to be a consumer-driven program, okay? It's an excellent program. I do wish it was a little more consumer-driven than it is now. But we need to make sure that whatever we decide, that we really look back at the history and also make sure that we put the word person-centered, consumer-driven, because that's what our community wants.
Yeah.
I also wanted to mention that, we talk about included services. And I forget whether I said this here or in another committee I serve on. But in lieu of services, can we find a different title? Because that's going to confuse our community too. Okay, so.
Horrible name.
Let me throw one out if I could. Supplemental community services.
There you go.
Because they are community-based
That's a great
services.
recommendation.
With supplemental community-based services. Something our community can understand. Because in lieu of services,
Sounds like you're not getting it.
and it sounds like a denial, or I can just hear, I work at the Burton Center for Independent Living, and I can hear all the phone calls. Julie and I and others are gonna get. Julia's in the back of the room.
That's a great.
Okay, so we need to use language people understand.
Thank you.
And while I have the mic, I want to talk about one more thing. The whole spend down, share of cost issue. Why don't we call it a copay? If you try to explain, and I do this, we all do this all the time at our ILTs, when you try to explain spend down and share of cost to folks, they don't understand it. They don't understand there's a benefit. So why don't we call it a copay or a deductible, something that people are used to. They're probably still not gonna have issues with it. I'm not saying they won't. But when you try to explain spend down to a relative of someone with a disability, or the person with a disability directly, I tried to explain to one of my relatives once, they got really mad at me. And how could you? But that happens all the time, which is why a lot of people who would be eligible for IHSS, we can better understand how the process works. They're not taking advantage of the service.
Marty, the other Marty, actually, Marty Emoto, CDCAN family member. Actually, Peter, to your point on the in lieu of services, when I was at the October Department of Healthcare Services stakeholder meeting when they were talking about Colleen and all, whatever it is now, they actually did mention it, concede that the in lieu of services name was not, the best. And I think they came up with something, but, and it just was kind of left there. But it does sound awful, and you have to explain it to people that it's not instead of, you're not taking away something.
Plain language.
So there's that. And, but I just want to say from a personal standpoint, my sister who had developmental disabilities and physical disabilities, and she was duly diagnosed with mental health issues. She was Medi-Cal, and how honestly, even though as much as I knew, if I found out anything and I was the lead contact, it was only about if something ran out, meaning the most on the Medicare side, and to get, tell me at 7 a.m., get a phone call saying, when she was in the acute care hospital, that you got to take your sister out, without telling me that why, other than her Medicare is running out, and not saying that, actually, I don't have to take her out. Finally, I just said, no, we're not doing anything. And that pissed them off, I think. But I'm just saying that we had that discussion yesterday, but as we're talking today, and we're trying to do a master plan that isn't just recreating the mess that we are in now, we got to be aware of, I think, Lydia, you raised this too, is how do we make things simpler for the families, for the people receiving services, for the providers, everybody, and because I think the danger here is that we still kind of end up like the mercury, we end up kind of back where we were because we look at the silos and say, well, we can't do this, we can't do that. And I think at some point we do have to think boldly. We have to look at how do we change things. And some of that is going to be incremental, we understand, but some of it, we can't just recreate the mess and just call it different labels, right? I mean, Anna, you get it. Also, I do want to, I'm not quite sure where this fits in, but when we talk about IHSS, which I agree with the comments that Karen made and Peter, we got to also remember there's other forms of home care provided by other systems that are funded by home and community-based Medicaid services. We seem to forget that. So regional center services, for instance, is just one, and that is funded by the same funding stream. It's Medicaid home and community-based services. They have a home care called supported living. Many of those workers, I would say the great majority, are also IHSS workers. And so when and they're faced with the same issues of growing costs and how do you stabilize those costs and how do you provide those services. Workforce issues are the same. So when we have this conversation, the governor's executive order did mention these other systems of services. Let's make sure we don't forget it, because as we're coming up with solutions, we got to make sure they apply to everyone. We got to make sure the information from here gets transmitted over to the Department of Developmental Services, a DS task force. Developmental Services Task Force is looking at some of these issues. The feasibility study should be shared by all the groups within the Health and Human Services Agency, so we start applying solutions universally. Anyway, that's what this other Marty says. So.
Carrie.
That's okay, neither can go, she's in.
Then Carrie.
My husband's name is Marty, do I count as a Marty?
Yeah.
I thought it was removed.
It's a good name, yeah.
So, meanwhile, Harlow, AARP, California, I guess I have a thought and then a question. So, I know that we really appreciate the uniqueness of IHSS. This is a program we should be proud of. There's no other state that has anything like this. And AARP is behind it. The question I have is, and I appreciate the reminders from Karen and Peter about the concerns about bringing that into managed long-term supports and services, is what would some solutions be to integrate it in a seamless fashion, but not lose the consumer looking center. Because what I see is, as I said, is how, we want to create a system where somebody can make a phone call or go into an office, and there isn't all this complication. If I need IHSS, I get IHSS. I get IHSS in the way that the consumers appreciate it and want to see what insurance I'm doing. And I don't have any answers, but I know it's a very question all the way around. How do we do that? How do we just make it, again, seamless, okay system through the data, they're going, they're going to get the best assessment, one assessment, and they're going to get the records and services they need in a warm handoff manner, without all the silliness that we have to go through. By the way, my son was just applying for college today at City College, and
silliness and having to go over it multiple times. That's what happened, but they got it done. Anyway, time and distance standards, there were time and distance standards proposed under, I think, the previous administration in managed long-term support services. Sarah, or somebody, can you remind me what
No,
happened?
we tried to, they were for other services,
Yeah.
but not,
No, not
community-based
LTSS.
They have them for SNFs, right?
They haven't just sniffed.
They have them for SNFs,
Wow, okay.
nursing homes.
Well, then I would definitely support, some kind of basic proposal. Again, implementing kind of distance standards for MLTSS.
Patient, very patient.
So usually I stay quiet because I'm a consultant, but I'm putting on my Medi-Connect evaluator hat and have a few things to say from our learnings from that evaluation. So in terms of IHSS, I feel like one of the one of the positive findings that came out of our evaluation in our surveys of people in that program, people who opted out and people in other counties, was there was a statistically significant increase of IHSS hours among the people in that program. And one of the reasons for that was because there was a requirement that the managed care plans had to work with IHSS and have these meetings, these interdisciplinary care meetings. And even if and it was just really sad to see when that requirement went away. Because it seemed like that was such a positive result of that program. And you saw the managed care plans advocating for people to get IHSS hours, rather than the fear that they were going to take them away. So this was, overall in the study, and whether it's carved in or not, having some requirement for the plans to talk with IHSS and do that mutual care planning, it would be nice to see that again. I don't know if you agree, Maya. The other thing I wanted to say is that in our evaluation of integrating SNF care, there's a couple things. First, a lot of the managed care plans had trouble contracting with SNFs. Not Maya, because she already was contracted, but there was a lot of anecdotal evidence that there was trouble contracting, and you've got to wonder if that's going to happen again.
That's what the recommendation.
Right. The other, we didn't do a lot of evaluations of the SNF integration, but the other thing we did was we just looked at publicly available quality measures, and saw that the SNFs that had contracted with Medi-Connect had statistically significantly lower quality measures, especially in staffing, than the ones that haven't. So I don't actually know what the explanation for that was.
Worse quality or better quality? Worse quality.
And lower staffing. So that was something I think to think about in this now expansion of that kind of integration. And then finally, I just want to say in the DSNP world, there's such minor requirements for integration for DSNPs. It's like you have to talk to Medicaid, and you have to have integrated grievance process, maybe something else. So, anything the state could do to try to bolster that kind of integration, I think would be great. And then finally, this DSNP lookalike problem. I mean, this is California. There was a whole MedPAC chapter about how this problem is terrible in California. We have all these Medicare Advantage plans that.
MedPAC is?
What is it? It's the
Congressional Advisory Committee on Medicare.
On Medicare. So they basically are the experts on financing of Medicare to advise Congress. And they did this whole report on California. And, some of these plans market to duals specifically. They have sometimes 90% duals, and they're not DSNPs. They don't even have a minor integration. And so California has to, we're different than other states. We've got to figure something out. And one of the things that really comes down to is if you're going to have a regulation on this, for someone to be a DSNP, what percentage of duals can they have? I mean, if they're not a DSNP, it's sort of like, do we say if you go over 50%, you have to be a DSNP? If you go over 30%, a lot of these plans have 90% duals. So, and that's just something to think about in any kind of recommendations about how to deal with these lookalikes. And then agree with you about the contracting of the Medicare plans with community organizations. There's other states that do that. But some of the plans we talked to about this for Medi-Connect would say, like, Yeah, I have like a Excel file with 3,000 names of community organizations that, you know, and the idea of making contracts with all of those, I think was kind of daunting. So then you see plans like San Mateo, who have one organization they contract with, and then that organization, yeah, the local plans do that. So, those are some of the barriers we saw in that evaluation.
Thank you, Carrie. Yeah, Anna and Lydia, right? Lydia, then Anna.
Can I just follow up on hers real quick? Lydia, Ms. Lee, that last point you made, Carrie, is our experience also with the managed care plans, that there's a cost involved in contracting with one-off organizations. And in our case, with community-based adult services, for example, I've spent the last 8 years trying to figure out how to organize our providers into an entity that would be compliant with federal antitrust laws to be able to have a, grouping of centers, be able to make things more efficient for the centers as well as the plans. It's a big challenge, it's very expensive, there's all these legal barriers involved. So it makes me understand why the health plans are reluctant to make those kind of one-off contracts. On the other hand, if you're really going to promote a value of being person-centered and particularly focusing on marginalized communities and people in your area who you're responsible for, then you really do need to be talking to community groups where trust is already established with the person, the place where they most receive their services, they most have trust, and you've got to put in that extra effort, in my view. And I think Alameda's been a great example of that with your home health and health home and whole person experience, and that's been our experience with piloting a center there to do that very thing. And the other thing I just wanted to wonder with you about, Anya, is I have to submit my comments to the CalAIM group soon. I'm going to focus on in lieu of services. If you send me that, or I'll write it down, the name you suggested, I'm going to throw that into my recommendation. Do you think there's an opportunity to have this group or your subgroup submit something that could go to CalAIM more officially? Because now I've got more ideas about what I want to submit to them. And I'm running out of time.
Yeah.
Because I think what we're talking about today is extremely important in building the future of this system.
And I think there's a way to do that.
Okay.
Right,
Well,
Also, just to note, February 24th, there is a stakeholder meeting that IHSS is having on all of these issues, so everybody here who wants to weigh in can do so and be there.
But can't our, the subcommittee comments be just given to them? I mean.
Yeah, and it's here, and,
Yeah.
So,
Any and all ways. And I let our director, JP, and they said, let us know anything that.
yeah. So we'll make sure that they get
yeah, we can do that, and I think we should take advantage of any opportunity BACS makes available, I think, February
24th, yeah.
24th. And I don't think the master plan on aging stakeholder group should stop advocating for an older adult part of the CalAIM new name process. Just because the department hasn't reacted so far doesn't mean we should stop our that. I think we should hold on to that position because I think it's the right position. It's a real lack in the planning that they have going right now. There's not a place for that kind of planning. Unsolicited, but I'm not
a quick follow-up, really, really fast. Just a quick follow-up for Lydia. So this whole build it or buy it, conundrum with the plan is, constant. And I'm just wondering how you would feel, Maya, about having a recommendation that would stronger than encourage, but to get because there's so much variability among the plans in my experience now for the last 10 years. And to encourage the plan, to be stronger than encourage, but the right verb, to provide an analysis for why they would do some of this work internally versus the marginal cost of adding some funds to a community organization to do the work. So I'm just wondering if there's a way that, because I could see some plans that would be just easier to do it internally, we're just gonna do it, and we're gonna have one of 200 caseloads and call it done, and say that we've done it, versus, you know what I'm saying? So, I don't wanna be telling the plan, I don't want this recommendation from this group in any way to be dictating to the plan what makes the most sense for their community. I'm very sensitive to that. But on the other hand, I don't want the default to always be, you know, excluding the community when there's expertise there and relationships and all of that. So I don't know what the answer is, but just for that. Yeah.
I just wanted, this is on, I wanted to go back to kind of the conversation we were having around the plan. So, the 5 counties that I serve, that I work in are all dual plan counties, right? And so there's some counties that are really interested in going back to try to develop a county plan, right? To create more local control and kind of flexibility.
Or what counties does he?
Like Nevada, Sierra, Yuba, Center, Colusa counties. So we're like Anthem, Health and Wellness, dual plan.
Commercial plan.
Two plan county.
That's what you can do. Two commercial plans.
Yeah, two commercial plans. And so there's an interest in some of these rural communities and counties to look at a county plan, and I'm not really following this, but it kind of occurs to me with some of the comments about having, you know, your local plan that has a board that's locally represented, that could be more flexible and have more local control to meet your community's needs. So I don't know if that's something we need to recommend or if it's outside our bailiwick, but I think, you know, there's interest in some of the rural counties to look, because there was an opportunity, as my understanding at one time, that you chose either you were going to be a county plan or you're going to be a two-county plan.
County organized health system.
Right.
Your geographic, and the geographic is 2 counties.
Right. So how, you know, and I know there's interest in some of the counties to go back to looking at, you know, taking that in-house. So, which would create more opportunity, I think, to address those unique local needs. I wanted to mention about HIPAA and, in this section about data sharing, because that seems to be a barrier, between, the medical and social service providers, and kind of how, you know, there's these health exchanges, there's various, whole person care pilots, right, that are using kind of different data sharing pieces. But I feel like this is something that, if you think about the HMIS system, the Homeless Management Information System, as an example for the potential of coordinating services across organizations for homeless individuals, what if we had something related to LTSS? And, you know, that cross between the medical and LTSS providers to be able to have a real coordinated entry system that might help address some of the complexity for individuals that they experience. And then what could also go in hand with that, and this kind of goes into your next section that we're going to hear about as well, but, you know, these navigators, these person-centered navigators that might be outside a health plan, right, that really understands the desires and needs of that individual and helps them, like, really has a base level of training and skills so that they understand the plans and the programs and the eligibility, and they do universal assessment kind of thing, and they really help people hold their hands and navigate across the silos, because it's super confusing. People get lost.
Anyone else?
Yeah.
Marty?
This is Karen on the phone. Can I ask how how the committee will process a recommendation for any kind of IHSS carve-out? My recollection, and I am looking really quickly at the evaluations that were done on Cal Medi-Connect, but the opt-out of IHSS consumers was extraordinarily high, if I recall that correctly, and I just can't underscore enough how disruptive this is in the IHSS community to even think about this being on the table.
Does someone want to answer that?
Yeah, I think in Karen, this is Maya. I think overall, you're correct. There was a high health job rate in our county. In San Mateo, it was not. I mean, 80% of the people in IHSS, did stay with the plan. So it varies by county. Of course, you know, we're the smallest and LA is the biggest, so, but when I talk about, when people talk about robust pilot, I think it should be done in places where there's a chance it can succeed. And, so IHSS, I don't know if you want to speak to the recommendation.
Yeah, I will.
Yeah.
You want to talk about that?
No, go ahead.
So, Karen, thank you so much. It's such an important point you're raising, because I think there have been several issues in the course of the meetings that we've all had that, we know that understandably, certain people have perspectives on issues, and others at the table have very different perspectives. And so I think your question about how to deal with that in how the writing group summarized recommendations, is a really important one, and I think we should talk about that. It could potentially, if we have time at the end of the meeting, we were supposed to talk about the LTSS report process. We didn't really think we needed that anymore, because we did talk about it yesterday, but since that time's there, I propose, I don't know if you all would be okay with that we think through this, because I think it's an important issue. It's not, I mean, it's about the IHSS, but it's also about some of the other issues that have been raised. So Karen,
I do get that. I get that it's, you know, that it integrates into other kind of conversations. But for as long as I've been participating since we started in September, we started off, I thought, with a lot of different emails that I got and that I saw through the IHSS Coalition about whether this was going to be a plan to force IHSS consumers in whole or in part into managed care. And I thought that that was one of the principles that had been agreed to early on, was that that was not the direction. So I feel like it would be something that those of us who have been saying that's not where this is going, that we would be, you know, criticized for having misled people.
right, no, I understand that, and I think, absolutely important points. I'll let Maya speak for the recommendations she spoke to, but my understanding was that this by no means was forcing. We were talking about doing a small pilot to enable people to access IHSS. Maya, did you want to, and also, we haven't had the whole committee weigh in on this. That's why this meeting is so important. So Karen, just to assure you, we are not at a point of making a determination either way, because the writing groups haven't addressed these issues.
As I pass the mic, Marty, as I pass the mic to Maya, I would just remind you again of the concept for integration for those who want it, Karen.
Yeah.
So,
People didn't hear
it's
that.
not about forcing.
Right.
They don't hear that though.
Yeah, no, I hear that as a big political and design problem. But I just want to call it out, at least for this discussion. You know, I don't think anybody in this discussion has a desire to force anybody into an integrated program. Maya, but you tell me that we do.
No, I think Marty's absolutely right. We're not talking about forcing anybody into anything. I understand the political problem. My understanding of this process is that, there are going to be recommendations that not everybody agrees on, and we have to wrestle with that as a committee, and then the stakeholder advisory committee has to wrestle with that. But I don't think, we should cut it off right now. That is going to be, that's going to be one of the things we talk about. And it's going to come out in the writing. It's been a surprisingly placid group, I have to say. Everybody, yeah, that's everything. But, you know, we know that there are, going to be disagreements. There are going to be disagreements about the topics we talked about yesterday. And we have to work that out in a way that affects us. But, I don't want to, preempt.
No, I don't think we should one way or the other preempt anything right now. Marty.
Marty again.
Marty up.
And this is Ellen, I'll just say that somebody's trying to move our seat.
Yeah, now I'm back in the queue again. I feel back on the grid. Marty Yamoto, CDCAN family member, and I want to support the words of Karen, and that somehow we got to make that issue clear, and yet keep things on the table, but making sure that we don't, our credibility is really important, and so if we committed to certain things or a certain pathway at the beginning, we've got to make sure we aren't.
I don't remember
And I don't think that's happening, but we just got to make sure because, you know, for everyone, because And I do want to remind everyone, and I'm not really clear as we're talking about, integrating home and community-based services into Medi-Cal managed care and the information sharing and all these other issues related to that. I still don't understand, and we need to somehow, I don't think we need a separate session. We did talk about it at one subcommittee meeting, but how does that specifically impact other types of services that are funded by home and community-based services? And so my sister, again, was a Medi-Medi. She was a regional center eligible consumer. She got IHSS. She got multiple services. None of them knew anything about the other service. So are we only talking about integrating one aspect of home and community services? Governor's executive orders seem to say other, but we're not, but we keep talking about IHSS, which I think is critically important. But it is supported living, which is another form of health care. And I just want us to just mention that every so often in the conversation, because words matter, right? And other people are listening to this conversation. I try to engage them, but they think this is not about them.
Right.
They think it's about IHSS only and older people in IHSS. And we just got to make sure that we're using and just use the words that people are familiar with. Supported living, home care, whatever it is. But we got to figure out, how do you tell, when my sister was still alive, and other families who have people, Medi-Medi, who were eligible for all types of services, that this matters to them. And I don't see, in all the discussions here, and you're all my friends and everything, I don't see any of that speaking to the people that I happen to know. I mean, it does speak to some of the people I know, but it doesn't speak to a lot of the families who are eligible for a lot of the services, and they don't think this has anything to do with them. So please, you know, if we're going to talk about home and community-based services, mention the other services too. Just say it in passing, because I'm curious, how does managed care deal with regional center funded services? I mean, some of them do a really good job, and others, I'm not sure. I think, you know, Lydia, with your experience going 10 years, you know that it's all over the map, right?
It is.
I'm assuming that Michael's this way.
No, I think it's Peter.
Peter, that
Oh,
way.
Peter. Oh, Peter. How did that happen?
Boy, Marty just said it really articulated. For example, I was with IHSS for several decades. I now get my home care through the regional center system because I'm not eligible for Medi-Cal. And the Letterman Act, of course, is entitlement. So as long as I'm not eligible for other services, I get my home care support through the regional center system. I have my own supported living agency in Column that does personal assistance services, carrying my old workers' comp and everything. We have the same sort of issues that folks have that are on IHSS, but a lot of things are a little more streamlined. The paperwork is not nearly as comprehensive. I mean, the paperwork is not as complicated. We need to bring in both the regional center system and the other systems into this conversation. We talked about, I think I raised it at our first meeting, about really having coordination between the LTSS Advisory Committee and some of the other agencies like DDS who are also working on the master plan on aging. We really need to have a way to communicate with them so that we can work together. We need to make sure that we address, as Marty said, both the people who are on IHSS and those who are on programs by the same waivers through the regional center system. I also think it's important, as we write our recommendations, I was getting a little tired, that we remember, as Anna alluded to and others, local control and the ability to work with community-based agencies like independent living centers, other providers who are really experts on how to help people set up services and support so they aren't high utilizers, keep them out of the hospital. So similar to what we do with the ADRC, some sort of MOU so that we can share information. You know, we have some great models in California And we have to look at them for other systems as well, including, care coordination. And with that, could someone pass me my drink?
A drink?
Last comment. Is there anybody besides Ellen that wants to speak that hasn't? Oh, Nina after Ellen, and then we're taking a 10-minute break. I'll wrap it up.
Great, I'll take it back. I just want to reiterate some of the thoughts that have been shared, which is that we kind of have to be aware that our cheese is going to get moved. We're here because we really want to see things different than the way they are. Not necessarily because we have the clearest roadmap on how to get there.
Right.
So, I know, having worked with IHSS for many years, it's deep in my heart. One thing I can share too is I was once the contract manager with IHSS, and we had about 15% of our population that selected that mode. Not everybody was in favor of that mode, there were problems with it, but there were a subset of people that didn't want to for whatever reason or could not manage their own care. So just keeping that in mind. The other thing I want to say is that I wish everybody could have the PACE model. We operate the PACE model on St. Paul's and many do. To think that you could have that fully integrated option for people that need it, not just the SNF eligible, but people who need that. That's the gold standard that I wish we could strive for all persons in California. That type of choice with the wraparound care. And then just finally, another plug for taking more time with IHSS. I think the complexity of the program, our truncated timeline.
That's 3 hours on the 27th.
Well, that won't be enough. What about 3 years? Well, I'm just kidding.
Let's move
3
in
years.
together.
But at any rate, I think it's a deep and complex topic, and there are multiple programs being served out of IHSS. It's not a uniform group of people, and it deserves our best thinking, and I don't know that that's possible in another 2 weeks.
There's Nina, and then we have to, then I'll do a little.
Thanks for letting me talk to them. So, actually, Marty raised an important point, and that is, I have heard from a couple of our volunteers that listen in, so up to our membership, some of these discussions don't seem relevant. They're not low income, they're not considered disabled enough to get help through one of the independent living centers. But we've got the vast majority of Californians that are not gonna qualify for anything, either because of income, they don't have a qualifying disability. I know we've kind of shelved some of the conversation because of LTSS financing, that may not get us all the way there. And so we're gonna have to think about how we help that, quote unquote, for the middle of that, we gotta go forward on that today. So all these conversations are important, but I just want to remember, we're 4.7 million family caregivers here in California. Most of them are spending thousands and thousands of dollars out of pocket, have no way of getting help for their loved ones and for themselves once they become disabled, unless they have some kind of impairment or low income. So we've got a lot of work to do, but I still want to get all of it.
Well, that is a perfect time to segue. If anybody has anything burning that they need to add before, we actually have time to take, I'd say, a 7-minute break, so that would be to 3:05. That's better than nothing, right?
Yeah.
So I just want to say thank you to everybody. I know this is really hard, these are tough issues, and ultimately, I sincerely believe we're all here for one thing, and that's to make the experience better for the person. We are here because we all care, and I think we're grappling with some really tough issues. This is not simple. There's a lot of issues wrapped up in, choice and access and standards and quality and, how the system is financed. These are complicated issues. So thank you for your interesting suggestions, and we will revisit how to address the challenging issues in the report. We'll continue to discuss that. Secondly, when we come back, we're going to talk about access and infrastructure. So that's outside of the managed care system, but looking at what is the basic service delivery mix across the state, and how do we ensure that people can access what they need. Talking about financing after that and leadership. So with that,
We'll see you back in now 6 minutes.
Oh, yeah,
I'm gonna go.
Take the little placards so you can get back in. There's a,
Oh, yes, that's right.
follow Lydia.
I don't know we need to go back to the value statement, but they're all here for, those are the four factors in your book. But you say you didn't commit to any program approach.
You don't want to deal with it.
Oh, yes, I know. I am really, people that I don't say, I'm sick of trying to cover on that currently, but I don't cover the Ohio State of California. And so if we're really talking about serve 58 counties, that's what we need to be talking about.
I mean, to be honest.
Maybe it ain't, but I understand
No, well, that's, the other thing is, you're right about that, right? We've learned not, there's certain things we have to don't touch, right?
Whatever they can go and find, leave it alone.
So now I'm coming over here to give a little lift to you. From a very underfunded community, you never get hardly anything.
We're on your side.
One of the reasons that I never get through it.
I know.
Yeah, actually, it's not really that. We're gonna have to get it going for it.
But that's an opportunity, so I'm saying, to work with them, they bring on board a problem.
Was that your brother? Randy Burger and it is, should be, I mean, again, it's not everybody who are. Because cash out helps a lot of people, but it helps everyone. And also the help vary. By the way, right, exactly.
Just want you to come to her house, yeah.
Still the same, but the problem is that they mark it off. And that's not going to spend. And they didn't spend a lot of money. So we're gonna have to make a convincing argument. By the way, I've been strongly against. Yeah, but that's.
It's a deja vu for us, Patty. We've had many of these conversations over the years.
Green paper?
Yeah. Yeah, there was a lot of, not early this morning, but a couple hours before the car. Absolutely. So we have not been able to, you know, I think you'll notice that these meetings are. There now, so I can clearly like figure it out.
I'm wondering if any of it got, probably just the length. There's a lot of stuff for today that went out to, this might be just a tickle. Can I forward that to you? Yeah, please. No, I can't, because we have no Wi-Fi. Oh, you have no, like this hotspot, I don't see this hotspot. Oh, let me try this hotspot.
The frustration of the day of 70.
I haven't been on Wi-Fi.
It can't be the county.
Okay, let me look, my master calendar called now, haven't sent it to you. Wait, so it was, January 27th? No. 1 to 5 is what it Yeah, I mean, we should be sending out a calendar. Right, yeah. I do kidding, that we send out.
You're here.
I wouldn't get their advocates.
They updated that.
Then I forward whatever I got. Yeah, delete it because, yeah, if we haven't already.
Okay, everyone, we're gonna get started. So we're gonna get started. Hey, Patty.
Up there, like, down.
On the 31st.
Are you really?
We're gonna move.
Yeah.
Okay, and I think we have most people in the room, and we will get started.
Well, 4 or 5, I thought I could drop out.
Okay. So thank you all for your, patience as we, move to the, let's take a sigh, and we're moving on to the next bucket of issues. We want to remind of everything we just talked about, so that does relate also to this issue, which is, LTSS infrastructure and access. So this gets to not how the services are delivered, but more what are the services. So we have, Lydia and myself that are going to be talking about this issue, and I can't move the slide. So, thank you, Maria. Okay, there we go. So we're gonna start with, an issue about data at the local level, and Lydia is here to talk about it because she has a lot of experience on this and is going to explain what the issue is and what the recommendation is.
Okay. Okay, hi everyone again. So for the controversial part of the discussion today, data. I was asked to talk about this because of my one and only time in my lifetime development of this long-term care county data book. In 2002, a lifetime ago, through a grant from the California Department of Aging, another year under Governor Davis, when there was a huge state surplus and funds, Marty, some of you remember that year. The call came not too long after that. There was an opportunity, a fantastic opportunity to use some of those surplus funds to advance initiatives throughout the state. And this was, the long-term care county data book is something that myself and some colleagues had dreamed about because we knew from our experience, and you know from your experience, that service availability is quite diverse across the state. And in the olden days, which I can talk about, there were efforts in the early 80s, through mid-80s until the state budget started becoming a little less robust, to actually have the state encourage development of long-term services and support through grants, through public-private partnerships, and so on. So what I wanted to just share, and I just really wanted to facilitate a conversation about this and get some input from all of you, is it seems that before we can identify our goals and before the research committee can create what kind of data points they'd like to include in a data dashboard for the public and for all of us, that we need to know where we are today. And what I found as I thought about this could be very exciting with this census just around the corner is if those, again, I did hand out two samples. Let me actually just pause for a moment and refer you to these two sample county pages from this, just holding up the long-term care data book, found a data book. Wouldn't it be cool if we could look at the data elements that are in this data book, which includes all the things we're talking about: workforce, housing, transportation, long-term care programs, Medi-Cal, demographics, population growth. We've got poverty levels, median household income, demographic trends, and so on. Wouldn't that be cool if we could capture the same data today, compare it to where we were in 2002, and then use this as our starting point for being able to look forward and be able to measure progress in whatever realms that we decide to identify, or the research committee decides to identify for the dashboard. Again, I apologize for my voice being a little short of breath today, getting over this cold. So the other, I think, really important piece of this effort, and it was a partnership with Sacramento County Planning Council, who were the data experts. And in 2002, imagine almost 20 years ago, the technology available to us was not, nearly as robust as what we have today to be able to amass large amounts of data easily, quickly, put it into a visualization of some sort, and be able to manipulate it. So this was really a very labor-intensive effort to collect the state and county level data. And I think the really cool part of this that was inspired by the California Healthcare Foundation Medi-Cal County Data Book. If you look to the far right on the second page of each county, we created these county comparisons so that you could look at your county at a glance. And I have to say, part of this was to inspire our local electeds to understand where their county and their community stood in relation to other places around the state. We then identified some key ratios here that we displayed, and then could group them in terms of the ranking among the 58 counties. You could see if you ranked in the highest third, the middle third, or the lowest third in your county. And be able to look again across, each of the 58 counties in the state and see where things rank. And then if you really study this, you can begin to see patterns emerge, where you can see a county that might have, more long-term care beds, for example, but has very little LTSS related capabilities. So I present this to you today, at the request as an idea that I think has a lot of value still. And I'm not saying that whatever, the recommendation is has to follow this exactly, but I do think a recommendation related to gathering data relevant to not just LTSS, but the workforce, transportation access, and so on across the state is something fundamental to the work. And we have such brilliant researchers in the state. Again, we've got much more robust software that can be utilized. I don't think this is, it's labor intensive in terms of identifying data sources, but in terms of assembling it and turning it into something understandable for the general public is, I think, much, much easier to do today than it was in 2002. And then the other thing I thought would be really interesting to see, and maybe this is more research committee, Carrie, I don't know.
I was just gonna say, I'm recruiting you for the research committee.
Well,
Or at
we're
least
talking to Dr. Laura, Christensen, we
Okay.
have some ideas.
Good.
But, and I don't know if we can find a student or somebody who could do this, but, when we talked about earlier that there aren't LTSS access ratios or access standards, I found one for adult day services from the Robert Wood Johnson funded study. And, so for example, if we were to think about this at the state level, this is national data. It says that the goal across the nation should be 8,520 adult day services sites. That would be adult day program and adult day health care, that's an example. And at the time this was published, there were 3,407. So where we are today, what the goal might be. And then this particular estimate was that 1.25% of the population over 65 would be eligible or would be interested in accessing adult day services. So if we could imagine finding those kind of standards, and they may not be perfect yet, but if we could imagine finding those kind of standards for some of these key data points that we wanted to look at, then we would have a goal to talk about and to measure ourselves against over the next 10 years. The other thing, last thing I just want to say about this, and then we can open it up for discussion, is when you look at these county by county snapshots in time, and it is a snapshot in time, you've got to remember, it also really gives you a picture of sort of the have and the have-not counties. And we all know that intuitively, we all know that from our experience, we all know that from a lot of different realms that we travel in. But to see it all, put, and this is very advanced, I understand this is not for everyone, which is why we need a dashboard. But when you look at it this way, it's really startling, and particularly when you look at the counties like Humboldt, who I gave here because of my friend Patty, and because it's an example of a county that is, in 2002, was number one in the 65 plus poverty level, for example. And the lowest, let's see, what else is interesting here? 11th in the percent of dual eligibles at that time. So on. So I just share this with you as an idea and a recommendation that we do need a way to do this. I don't know how we fund it. I don't know how it happens. That's something I think we could talk about a little bit more in terms of resources that we already may exist in the state. And I have to say the hardest place to get the data from and aggregate it at the county level was Department of Aging because of the PSAs. So it's very hard to break it down to the county level, except for those that are county level.
Right.
So great, Lydia, what a wonderful introduction. And I just want to say too, this kind of is a perfect segue to the next recommendation, and I think we can open it up for a conversation on data and infrastructure. Because the other common recommendation that's been brought forward is about developing, not just relative to Medi-Cal managed care, but a statewide infrastructure plan. So how can we use data, as Lydia was saying, to inform where we should be, set standards for where we should be, and then have a 5-year or so plan for the state to figure out how to work across public and private partners to actually reach the goals of this infrastructure plan. But some of what you said, Lydia, really stuck out to me, which is how do you even develop the access standards? That would take, because I don't know the extent to which, say, for example, caregiver resource centers, we need to think about the whole range of services and supports, not just Medi-Cal funded, but all of the different services and supports, and how you get there, because again, this is not something that the state alone can fund. And I think it's a really important, in terms of planning, it's a really important issue, data and infrastructure. So with that, Patty, I'd like to have a question.
Okay.
Oh,
But I
Lydia.
think Patty's gonna make my point, but, no, I just wanted to, supplement what you said before, Patty, and I are, both passionate about rural care, is that I think it also, begs us to ask questions then about why is this county so different from another, that could lead us then to some possible solutions and barriers, of which there are many.
I'm only opening my mouth because my friend Sarah said this is an important discussion, that you need to add your 2 cents. So, because I'm the only one here really representing rural areas, and I have quite a few recommendations that are going to go forward related to rural. I have a couple things. I will have a couple of comments. This one I'll make first, which is that, you know, we know that California's infrastructure around home and community-based services has struggled forever to keep up with the demand for services, due in part to the failure of financial investment. We know that as well, and budget cuts over the years. And I have to say, the only governor that I'm aware of that ever put money into senior services was Duke Majan, best director we ever had for aging. California Aging was Alex Gonzalez, because she worked so closely with Duke Majan, and she operated an area of on aging back in the 80s. But the transition to managed care offers an opportunity to define a baseline for access to home and community-based services, I think, across the state. However, as I was saying, it's great, aside from partnership for Medi-Cal recipients serving in rural areas, no other managed care plan currently exists to serve rural areas. None. No, that's the truth. None. The last one pulled out about 3 months ago. No, I was going to carry legislation that said, the Kaiser just said to every HMO, you want to practice in California, you have to cover the entire state. But anyway, it doesn't happen. So, while access standards exist for healthcare providers, no such standards exist, as we know, for home and community services, making it difficult to ensure that consumer access to these services on a statewide basis and eliminate geographic inequities, especially in rural areas. And I'll talk not just with this mic, but next time in the state discussion with some of the unique challenges that we have in rural areas. But I think that the California Health and Human Service Agency should establish a safety net and access standards for home and community-based long-term care services that identifies, and I'm going to have a strong recommendation on this plan, that identifies the basic service mix for each county. And then I think the state, I don't know how the state would handle it, whether they would contract with an entity to perform a statewide inventory to essentially assess the available basic core services in that particular county with, particular attention. Sarah and I have a disagreement. She counts 44 counties in California.
No, 58.
No, honey, as having some kind of a rural, I don't care about 44, I care about 37 that are really rural. Okay, so those 37 rural counties is what I want to see. I want to identify what the gaps are and where investment is needed to ensure that basic service net is in place. And we have major challenges in rural areas. So I've identified what I believe to be, and I'm just going to read them really quickly, the 12 basic core services that should be available and accessible in all 58 counties, and these are the ones that I think. This is how to keep people in their own home, in my opinion. Okay, adequate primary care services. This is not in order, but I mean, we in some areas, and that has to do with workforce issues, we don't have them. Adequate primary care access. 2, adequate access to specialists, which could also be through telemedicine. 3, case care management for all incomes. This might be, take the form of expanded ACE program, which I absolutely adore, and we have it in Humboldt County, or expanded MSSP models, or information and assistance. Oh, that's a whole other issue, or bringing back similar programs like we had back in the early 90s called linkages. Or in-home caregiving access for all incomes. Okay, in-home caregiving access for all incomes. It's not enough to just address the IHSS and the Medi-Cal population. Because if you don't have daughters, that's your social insurance for caregiving. In rural areas, let me tell you, people don't have, their kids. Oh, 1 minute? Okay, 4, 5, residential housing options. 6, transportation, both for medical appointments and other needed services. 7, home health. 8, rehabilitation services. 9, nutrition services. Both home delivered meals, because that's a critical need. But dining centers address social isolation. INA, the other services, mental health. 10, adult day health care, because that addresses family respite, isolation, central service for care management, we know. 11, mental health services, and last but not least, because it's working in rural areas, the villager concept. With that village approach, which allows elders to remain in their own homes with assistance provided by neighbors and volunteers.
Well, thank you, Patty, for your recommendation and expanded summary of what Lydia also had recommended. I think your recommendations both segue well off each other. I think that we should distinguish between access standards for medical managed care versus an infrastructure plan that is just a general infrastructure plan for each of the counties, because it's a very different consideration. But both equally is important. So I want to go to the phone. Donna Benson has been waiting patiently. Donna.
Thank you. First of all, thank you, Patty, for your list, which includes a lot of items around family caregiving. And then in looking at the recommendation that we have up right now on for the infrastructure in general, I would say that part of what we need to begin to think about, which I don't know has come up, is that we do have families where, for the caregiver, they're long distance caregivers, and then they will go and pick up their relative. This just happened very recently for us, for example. They went overnight during the holidays, picked up their relative, and brought them here to California from a different state. And then now when they called us, they said, well, mom had all of these services wherever she was, but now I have to wait however many months without really getting into the system fast enough. So I just wanted to, if there's a way for us to look at how to speed up things that are not necessarily, between California and other states, because this is not, what I'm giving you is not an example that doesn't happen quite often when relatives go, they get panicked, they bring their relative home, now they're a caregiver. They were a long-distance caregiver before, but now they're bringing the sick relative into the state of California, but they didn't anticipate any of the waits that may occur for transfer during that time. So that's it.
This is Lydia again. Couple other thoughts to toss out to y'all before we wrap up this section and move on is, I think this is also rebuilding infrastructure. If you look at the two counties I gave you, Anna mentioned to me that she noticed linkages on here in her county. She looked at the data book, it's gone. ADCRC with grant funding is gone. There might be some others in some of the other counties that aren't right here in front of me, but that's why I think looking back is also really important and paints a picture. And then I think we have an opportunity now with this governor and treasurer, for example, to think about some innovative ways where we can spur private development of some of these options. For example, adult day programs, and there was an initiative that Peter was involved in, and Susan, who's not here, through the legislature to create, for example, a special bond that could be used to rebuild infrastructure. That might be something that we could revisit, for example. With the surplus in the state budget, again, harkening back to the old days of Senator Mello, who was very passionate about older adult services, the state encouraged and invested in program development, particularly in unserved and underserved areas, with startup grants. Those were time-limited grants, they were competitive. If we can identify, again, areas where there's a great need and lack of services, and there's not private investment available, which is hard to access, then we could encourage the startup, for example, of more nonprofit centers with startup grants, and then make sure that they're financially sustainable. So I think there's an opportunity here to think about public-private partnerships too, because the private sector should care about this work because of their workforce in particular, and retention. So those are just kind of a couple of thoughts that I will leave you with. And we're having our first access writing team phone call this Thursday at 9 to 10:30. So I've got a pretty good group that said they would be there, but if this has sparked your interest at all, you'd like to join, just let me know.
71 recommendations.
We got rid of 2 today, so yeah, well, we didn't get rid of them, we exchanged with, we transferred over.
Okay.
Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you, Lydia. That was really informative and thoughtful. Oh, Ellen, did you have a comment to make? Yeah, sure. And then we'll talk about waivers.
I was just going to say, with the long-term care infrastructure, just to revisit funding the older Californians Act programs, which did include linkages. During the Great Recession, a lot of those budgets were cut and back to nothing. So with our growing population, just that's the recommendation.
That would go under care management.
That is a very important point. So this next issue is one we have touched on in different conversations. We all know that there are 5 or 6 home and community-based waivers that operate for older adults and people with disabilities out of the Department of Health Care Services or via MOU with other departments. There's also a really impactful waiver that's quite service-rich, which is the Developmental Disability Service waiver, operating out of CDS, which frankly I think is a model for the broader home and community-based waiver system, because you have waivers of the multi-purpose senior services program. We have the assisted living waiver program that we've discussed. There's the home and community-based alternatives waiver, which used to be called the skilled nursing, the NIF waiver, which transitions people from nursing homes to the community or helps people stay in the community who are at risk. Those are the 3, I would say, significant ones impacting this population, along with the DD waiver. But the challenge with these waivers is they're really, really small. People don't know about them most of the time, they don't know how to access them, and, there's wait lists, long wait lists. And I will add on top of that, as Lydia and others have mentioned, they're very administratively complex. I'm also gonna throw into the mix on this one, because we haven't talked about it a lot. It's not a waiver, but it's the California Community Transitions Program, which is also, you know, has had some recommendations for simplicity, streamlining. But a few years ago, the IHSS had put out a proposal for consideration, at least they had discussed it, which was, could we combine and consolidate some of these home and community-based waivers? And think of it as a service mix, rather than, you know, say MSSP, which is a really, really strong model, but has a lot of restrictions. It's limited to people age 65 and over. Well, I might be 64 and a half and have a really severe need for that care coordination provided by MSSP, but I can't get it. So is there a way to rethink these home and community-based waivers, expand capacity? I think if you look at the DD waiver, there is not a wait list, there's excess capacity. There's reasons for that, partially because of the Lanham Act, but I think it's an important model, and I think we have an opportunity to advocate for changing the paradigm of how we view home and community-based service waivers. They're not nice things to have. They are essential elements of keeping people in the community or transitioning them from nursing homes.
Excellent.
But it is also important to note that waivers themselves are silos.
Yeah.
So if the state is eventually moving towards a more managed care delivery system, that's something to consider. But at the same time, this is where we are right now, and we still have a system reliant on these services. So how can we think about it differently and make it more accessible to people who need these services? So with that, Nina. And I think we have about 5 to 10 minutes for this discussion.
So, I'll just say, I support any move towards California. We're still hearing some conversations that sound like silos, and I understand this is about Chicago, but really getting to a point where we're consolidating all these waivers, all these programs, so that, again, eventually people can go down the services they need, in a setting of their choice, live in their home and community. And I've already said, we were very fortunate with our son, who was his first diagnosis 2.5 and on speech, no eye contact. We thought it was going to be hopeless. He is still on the DD waiver, although he's now, I think he just gets social services. He just has kind of the, you know, focus. He only wants to talk about what's interesting with him, that kind of stuff. So he ended up, I believe, thanks to the ABA services he got and the support he got, notwithstanding some of the issues we have in public schools, he responded really well to behavioral. And as someone who's advocated for older Californians for 22 years now, to have something like that model for our membership would be a godsend. So just saying I support or making our way in that direction.
So, quick question, is the living waiver considered, yes, it is, okay. So, I've never quite understood what the opposition has been to the waivers from the administration, being that I think a solid case can be made that there are waivers associated. So, what do you chalk that up to? Is it really just a knee-jerk reaction to not knowing what it is about, or is there something we can educate the new people on?
That's a great question. Actually, it's the way that historically Department of Finance has calculated cost neutrality. They view people, and this doesn't just apply to the MSSP waiver, this applies also to the HCBA waiver, and I don't know about MSSP, but they see people coming from the community who currently are not on services as a cost.
Yep.
And Yet if you're coming from an institution, they see that as a savings, so they like the waiver for those purposes. I think that's a challenge because all of the people on the wait list have been deemed as, assessed as eligible for the waiver. So either they're eligible or they're not, regardless of where they live. And, so I do think it's a really important point to make of how fiscal neutrality is calculated and how we're defining costs to the state, because these people would, in my opinion, otherwise have the risk of entering a nursing home or a hospital, say, if not having access. So I think it's an important point.
Just adding up to that. So when, in the records, why does it say consider expanding slots versus expand slots?
I don't know, I just put words in it, yes.
I mean, I think that that seems to me like something that very solidly should be a recommendation. Expand slots to meet needs, period. And then the second thing that comes out of that is that, does that then become a data request, which is, what is happening to people on the waiting list? What do we know is the end result of them being on a waiting list? Are they going to the hospital? So can we also add that to the data recommendation? And I do want to not forget that I made a data recommendation way back in the beginning, which feels like 1,000 years ago, that there needs to be regular calculations of the savings of IHSS institutions or to not having it at all. And I don't want that to get lost. I don't know what happened to that.
For the cross-cutting group to Ellen.
To Ellen. Okay.
Yeah.
So those are the things that well, just the data. But,
These recommendations already captured about.
so can we make it like expand slots, not the data? Okay, awesome.
Yes. Oh, okay. Right, sure, Anastasia Dodson from DHCS. This is on that point about the waiver slots. So, Medi-Cal, Healthier California for All, the intent with the enhanced case management and in lieu of services is to look at how that type of array of services can be provided to even more people. So, we still need to work together on all the details, but that's the intent.
So does that bypass a need for a recommendation? Is that what you're saying?
I'll leave it up to you as to your recommendation, but just, technical clarification that the Healthier California for All, Medi-Cal, that's what we're trying to do, is provide that array of services.
Do we need that to be a part of that to happen, though? I'm just asking technically, can the legislature just increase waiver slots, period? Can they just appropriate and make that happen?
The administration has to do away with that.
Oh, so it has to be incorporated as a part of the CalAIM?
No. So there's efforts that the administration is making through the waiver renewal efforts to provide the array of services similar to what the waivers offer.
Right.
To more people through managed long-term services and support.
So what I'm asking is, separate from that, can we do what we're talking about here, or is that another thing that requires federal approval that we might as well work into the waiver somehow? A whole different waiver, okay, god damn it, okay.
Right.
Reduce administrative complexity.
But we're hoping that through the waiver renewal efforts, the 1115, 1915B, that will reduce complexity. Again, we still need to work out the details.
Okay.
Want to work that with all of you. Thank you. Sorry. Really important point, and thank you, Anastasia, for being here to address those questions. And so one kind of way to distinguish Christina's question from Anastasia's point is that the state, this gets back to what we were saying, the state really would like to move to a more a service delivery system where the managed care plans are the hub of delivery for this range of services. So that's the goal through the California Healthier for All. Where we are right now is we do have this system, and I think we're late. The implementation will take some time of the Healthier for All, the timeline. It's just a consideration for the committee, given the challenges that we've talked about today of where we are right now with managed LTSS. I think nobody would argue that it would be great to be at a more streamlined system that provided access to the range of services, but just a consideration for the committee of whether we want to, the report wants to call out the current infrastructure needs.
That's it, right.
Can I say? Okay, I see Anna
we need to move on. So one more comment.
Okay, so this is Anna. So when we're saying that we want waiver consolidation and expansion, are we also, does that speak to the need for more coverage? Many of the rural communities have none of these waiver services available. So I want to make sure that that's captured in there. For that infrastructure?
That would be the infrastructure.
Okay. Okay, it's all related. Because let me just say that we have individuals in traumatic brain injury is a really good example of how this plays out, just does not work for individuals. So there's a need for some people with traumatic brain injury to be able to access multiple waiver services, right? So right now they just have to pick. They have to be like, I'm going to go to this one particular, right, which doesn't make sense. A lot of individuals, and this is a senior disability issue, majority of older adults with TBI have gotten them as a result of a fall. That's what all the hospital data says, right? And they need more supported living type of services, kind of to Marty's point earlier, like we need to be able to expand supported living level of community-based services to new populations. So someone with a TBI isn't well served by the regional center because they probably acquire their brain injury after the age of 18, right? And those are services they could really benefit, not everyone, but there's definitely people who could benefit from that level of regional center services that can't get them, right? So there's a lot of, you know, and there, with TBI in particular, bringing it up, because it's been something that's been kind of a passion for a time now, is that, you know, they fall through every gap in service, right? Because they need that extra, you know, case management, ongoing supportive services.
Medical, behavioral.
It's the whole cognitive, behavioral, the whole piece. So you said that it's an extreme example, but one that plays out every day, and is also a high percentage of our homeless population that we're working with.
Sure.
So it's all, you know, we need this in every county. And we need people not to have to choose one service, even though they may need more.
Great, really important point. Ellen, you wanted to make Peter, thank you, okay. Yeah, turn on the door.
I think, as we talk about Medi-Access waivers, I think we need to write a really strong justification, to go with that recommendation, because I think there is having done this for a while, I think that there is a sort of a misunderstanding about the benefits of the waivers to people with disabilities. Having a really strong data recommendation as part of a recommendation to expand access to the various waivers is going to be key to move this forward.
Thank you, Peter. Great, thank you all. So we have made it through 2 of our 4 buckets. So we are starting public comment at 4:30, is that correct, Mark? Okay, so we have about 45 minutes for the next 2 buckets. They're not as long as the first 2. In fact, system financing, Christina and I are going to cover right now. We've talked about some of these issues, but the one we're starting with is the fact that the state-local financing structure is structured in a way where local levels, and Ellen, you may also want to weigh in, don't really have an incentive to promote access to home and community-based services fiscally, because they're on the hook for IHSS, but yet they don't pay a share of costs for nursing homes at the local level. So, well, I don't think that counties would try to, you know, push people into nursing homes. We all know that it's hard if you don't have the fiscal incentives aligned appropriately. So this is a really challenging issue because it talks about realignment. And I know that this is not a popular issue, but we are not here to be popular. We're here to talk about where the problems are in this system. So I would love Christina to shed light on it. Karen, you also coming from Sonoma County, might have some perspectives, Ellen, as well as anyone else who would want to weigh in.
And Karen on the phone.
Karen, I'm sorry.
So I guess ultimately my question, Sarah, is
Karen is on the phone, but I didn't hear my homework assignment.
no, it's just waxing political or poetic on 1991 realignment.
Oh, let's not go into that, but I'll help however I can.
So is there how, like, I mean, I guess ultimately, like, how much of a synopsis should I be giving? I don't know, okay. So for those who don't know, and I honestly don't know how many of you know or don't know, but one of the reasons why IHSS is so complicated, it's administratively complicated, it's also financially or fiscally complicated because there's different funding streams that are governed by different sets of rules. And I would say the most complicated element is that the state and local formula for IHSS funding was originally created in 1991. It came out of a recession or pending recession where the state had this big deficit. I want to say it was Pete Wilson. They split the baby and they did like half was increase in taxes, the other half was reductions in programs. But to get around Prop 98, they created this super Byzantine formula, which was a small piece of the vehicle license and the sales tax would get funneled directly to local government. And as a result, they actually changed what at the time was the county's share for a number of social service programs. And they basically upped the county's, it was such a, I mean, it's such an example of political strategery, for lack of a better word. The only non-word is strategery. I mean, but it's brilliant to solve the problem, right? So they took the formula, and whereas for IHSS, I can tell you that it was like, I would say it was like 98.5% of IHSS was paid by the state and 1.5 by the counties. They then made it for the non-federal share. They then changed it to 65-35, meaning that the counties had a 35% share of the non-federal share, but then they made up for it by providing for this funding stream that was 1991 realignment. But it's not as simple as they just get a funding stream that goes to IHSS. They get a funding stream that is sort of like a really complicated fountain where it starts at the top and then it kind of goes into these different buckets, and there's different rules about which buckets they go into, and when they flow over, where the overflow water goes or the overflow money goes is governed by other rules. And it's evolved over time as this Frankenstein formula that if you try to show someone, and I've tried, in welfare institutions code, if you actually said, here's the section on realignment, they wouldn't know what they were reading or that it had anything to do with funding, because it uses all different words. It's absolutely impossible to understand, and I say that as someone who for 10 years has attempted to understand it. So the reason that we're raising this today is, I would argue, it should be revamped. Our recommendation should be a put it all out on the table. A lot has changed since 1991. A lot of these add-ons that have happened over the years may have solved immediate needs. Like, for example, I believe maximum family grant money comes out of a small piece of realignment, and there was some CalWorks grant increase that came out of it a couple of years ago either. So it's become this pot where lots of little things are now getting like funded out of, but it's become very unwieldy. I would argue it's probably not meeting the local need in terms of the amount of money that's being expended on services. And it's just creating this really bizarre reimbursement scenario, but they don't call it reimbursement. It's like, you're supposed to call it caseload growth, even though it's technically, okay, it's a big hot mess. We want to recommend, and I'm not even going to get into what the consequences are, but the consequences of the mess are actually very impactful to public policy. But I'll just stick with the recommendation being that the whole thing get revisited and all of the programs funding to put on the table, and we start from the beginning.
Yeah, and this gets again to the fiscal incentives of what are the incentives at the local level to ensure that people can access services according to their needs and preferences. The fiscal incentives are not aligned right now. Due to time, I think we should move on. Is that okay with it? Oh, Karen, let me, hear from Karen. Karen here, Karen Fees, and then we'll move on.
Karen Face County, great synopsis, it's just a mess. And not only that, there's a 2001 realignment that also adds in, and there's money that bounces back and forth between different scenarios. I'm happy to relook at that. I know that it's gonna be a challenge to relook at that, and then the way to do this is actually look at actual costs, and not just some strange formula, as you call it. We need to make sure we get funding for what it costs to administer services at the local level. One scenario, CWDA trying to work with the state to look at Medi-Cal funding formulas last year, was it last year? Last year, and they did an RFP, the state did, to have someone look at the funding formula, didn't get a single bidder.
So I know, what was it asking for?
We're looking at some Medi-Cal.
Medi-Cal illustrated.
Okay, Ellen, quick comment, and then I'm gonna
Quick.
shut us down so that we don't forget our dear issue of leadership at the end. We'll do a quick segue from.
I would just like to invite this topic also to be part of the longer deliberation on IHSS. I thought your summary was really good. I felt sick to my stomach as you went through the discussion, just how complicated it is, and then what changed with CalMedi-Connect, and then reverting back to.
Oh, I didn't even talk about the MOE, exactly.
So, what I think is a healthy part that IHSS is built on is the realignment formula, so it's definitely the financing of the integrated system is tied up with IHSS.
This is Karen. This is Karen Kiesler. Can I drop in just two things very quickly?
Go ahead.
Thank you. Very quickly. One, I want to point out that both public authorities and county admin are significantly underfunded, and if there's going to be an effort to deal with the overall complicated funding stream, that we need to do some consideration of that. Two is that it seems like it's really complicated on IHSS funding, and I confess that it is. But each and every change that's been made really since the program started has been to protect the program, to provide money for it. There have been a lot of really creative things that have been done, not only in IHSS, but in education funding, court funding, on, that have made our state budget way more complicated than it used to be. And it's with the best of intent, which is to keep money in the program.
Right. Yep.
Great. Thank you so much,
Can I
Karen.
say one last thing, Sarah? Nothing more than I've been asked about day 2 on IHSS. Do we want to make this a subject for that?
That's a good parking lot consideration. I think that you should bring that to your IHSS team because it's kind of up to you guys to determine how you want to set that agenda.
Okay.
Great, it's certainly an important issue. Okay, so this next issue, we've talked about it, kind of touched over it, and it's come up in other policy discussions. It's the issue of kind of our state level budget structure. We always talk about the fact that there's individual silos of funding. But there are potential ways, and other states have done this, to merge budgets across programs so that you have a more consolidated LTSS budget. So it's a more global budget where you can have services aligned according to individual needs rather than, wait lists here because this funding stream doesn't allow you to move resources to another funding stream. This goes in the bucket of another longer term recommendation, but I think that it's a really important consideration about how we budget at the state level really does impact how people access services. And I think that we're also used to how we budget, that it's hard to think of doing it differently. It's definitely a hard question, but it has been done. So I would love to, there was the long-term care financing study that Carol Swartzlander oversaw as part of the Community Choices Program, talked a lot about this. I think that the state could revisit this issue, have somebody research it and see what might be possible. So now Maya's going to talk a little bit about global budgeting and using managed care as a vehicle for that. 2 sentences.
At this point, we already have simple accountable entities that operate under a global budget and that, for health and potentially other services, and those are managed care plans. So, the recommendation is that we just need to strengthen the financial incentives for plans to invest in home and community-based services as an alternative to institutional care. So that just needs to, we just need to keep working on that.
Any other comments? I think that's something that the financing, writing group will be hopefully touching on within the recommendations. Great. Oh, did you want to make a comment? Me, oh, mine.
We really support this recommendation. Again, it really brings us back to the conversation we had earlier about some of our best practices programs and how we made the best use of the money. Yeah, we've got to work. And again, this would really allow us to provide services to people as they need them, setting up their choice. So I'm happy to share AARP public policy on this. We have a policy book. Yeah, I'm going to, probably from our computer.
Okay, great. Well, thank you. Now, this is good. Now we have a half hour.
Over many years around this topic, right? And so one of the examples that is given in some of the recommendations, and some of you may know, is around on the federal level, we have the Administration on Community Living. So there was a few years back where they consolidated Older Americans Act funding, Rehab Act funding for independent living centers. We have traumatic brain injury, we have developmental disability services on the ACL level. So I just want to open up the conversation, but I also want to make sure, because this is one of my personal concerns with this, is how does a restructuring on a state level ensure greater access to services for people with disabilities at the local level, people living in Humboldt, Nevada County, and San Mateo, wherever. Because I will just be frank that on the ACL level, I can't really articulate to you how it has improved access to services for ACL. So how do we ensure that that happens under a restructuring?
I love that point, and I think that you're absolutely right. Anybody can come out with a plan to restructure, but does the person at the local level really care? However, where I think it can make a difference is with leadership and planning.
Right.
And then you see a difference, and I'll turn it to Patty to see what.
No, I totally agree with what Sarah just said. And it depends on who's the leader also within the Department of Community Living. So I'm assuming that's going to be Kim. But it also is gonna mean, it's also gonna mean internally major restructuring within this department. Will no longer be the Department of Aging. Just looking at, Title III, whatever, programs, no longer. But it's really, and I think it's gonna be leadership like you, and you, and you. This is who I'm nominating for the Deputy Cabinet Secretary in the Governor's office. I want everybody to know. I'm just saying. Just saying, I'm going to make her drop my part. But it is, it's everybody being involved, and it's having a really good leader. Now, I've been extremely impressed with Kim. I think, even though she doesn't have a background in aging, she's a learner, she's a good listener, and she follows through, and I really like that. And I think those are really good qualities. So one of the things that I'm going to recommend is, and I have a recommendation for that actually, is that that Kim consider bringing in some other states. What we talk, Virginia, Nevada, Colorado, was it Nevada? Still one was Nebraska. I want to start with an answer.
Minnesota.
Minnesota. There were 4 states that she thinks, that she would think of bringing in, who have already done the restructuring in their state, that could help in the redesign, and which I think is going to be extremely important. On the legislative side, I also have a recommendation that we have a standing Senate Committee on Aging and Long-Term Care, and an aging committee on aging and long-term care. That no longer, because aging and long-term care does nothing but Older Americans Act programs. I mean, it's like a minuscule amount of bills that come through that committee. But with expanded jurisdiction, which means that they would have a very powerful committee, both in the Senate as well as in the Assembly. That means that some of those bills will be double referred, because we'll be taking things away from health, from human services, from transportation, from housing. I mean, it's going to be a very big and powerful committee, on both sides. Of course, I have to convince the pro tem and the speaker to do that. Because it's up to them to decide what their standing committees are and who will be on them. But anyway.
Great, thank you, Patty. So I think, what's important here is it's the themes and it's the structure. It's, we're not talking about specific people right now. I would like, I think we have comments from Marty and Ellen and, not Nina. Yes. Do you want a clarifying question first? Yep, okay, and then we'll go to you.
Question. I haven't read the material on this, so I apologize for that, but I wanted a reminder of, if we were modeling the federal department, what's included and embraced in that, what would kind of correlate back to California, and what about the requirement for single agency for certain things like Medi-Cal and stuff?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I don't think any of the recommendations right now go into detail on which programs. I think that's a very important discussion. But the concept, if you think about it, we have a caregiver resource center program at IHSS, but we also have one at aging. ILCs at DOR, we have, there's a bunch of programs that people use across all these different departments. Community transitions at IHSS, et cetera, et cetera.
So I don't think it's, the concept isn't, let's copy exactly what ACL is doing, but let's think about what the state would want and how to design that. I don't want to put Mark on the spot, but it would be great at some point if you, I know next week the department will be talking about their new strategic vision.
Yes.
So if you can say anything about that now, that would be awesome, but you might not be able to.
No, I mean, I can share out Wade's high-level goals, but whenever the time's appropriate.
Yeah, we'll pass it over to you after we hear from.
Yeah, I just, would comment on this question. Looking at some other states around the country, I think it's the states that bring in visionary leadership in aging and health and long-term services and supports that actually restructure and do new things outside of the box. And I think you gotta make, the governor has to want to do that almost, and make that kind of a change. That kind of leadership is important. Of course, I'd love to see Sarah in the governor's cabinet, but I know we're not commenting on that. The other thing I'd say though about it is that, I think around this table, where we're handicapped in a lot of ways, other than perhaps why she may not be, is that, as you all know, all the money's in healthcare. All the money's in healthcare, with a small amount of money in aging and developmental disability and such. And, you know, I just think we need to look at leadership that crosses the nursing facilities, IHSS, schools, as well as area agencies on aging and other types of aging, traditional programs. And so we have, basically we have to bridge that gap, or else we're not gonna solve the leadership problem. Thank you.
Yeah, just one quick thing, I just, what Marty just raised, and I forgot to say, when Anastasia talked about enhanced care management in lieu of services, supplemental, what is it, supplemental community-based services? Okay. The governor's budget proposes $1.4 billion on an annualized basis for those services. There's some real money behind that, and so that's why we need to build together. Marty says that's where the money is. It's in the governor's budget for, the new name for CalAIM, which I can never remember. Enhanced care management in lieu of services, $1.4 billion, like $700 million in the first year, because it's probably just half a year, and then $1.4 billion in the next year. It's a lot of money.
Yeah, we'll take it.
Yeah.
Shani, just a quick comment that, we're working on the leadership and cross-cutting area, and we're seeing a lot of recommendations on this pop up, both for, cabinet level individuals who lead the aging department and our community living department, as well as an integrated department. So there's a groundswell coming of people that support this, the recommendations. But the one thing I want to say is that we did this at the local level, and I was with IHSS at the time, and we merged with the AAA and Adult Protective Services, and everybody got together kicking and screaming, and I even had rented, salvage furniture, and it was the kind of thing where they said, this will never work, but it was part of a larger vision of no wrong door. So the services that serve seniors and persons with disabilities were integrated at the local level. It took many years to make sense of that, but I think you have to start somewhere, and also it's the accountability piece. Somebody has to have responsibility for this master plan, otherwise it's gonna end up on Patty's show.
Nina.
So this brings me to the LTSS scorecard, and you're looking at everybody got an update on June. Is it June?
Yes.
Okay. So, and when we talk about leadership, the states in the top quartile, and California is one of them, but Washington, Oregon, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Vermont, from 2017. Colorado, these are all states that we're gonna wanna look to for leadership, but I think the states that got this first was Washington. And they're nearby. So.
Washington and Oregon are two of the states that we looked at.
Washington and Oregon. We can also talk to them about.
Our Mark.
Oh, yeah, Mark.
Yeah, Mark, yeah.
Great. Yeah.
well, that's really helpful, and I think, just to clarify, the other recommendation that's been put on the table, Ellen was referring to, is, the issue of the department, obviously, strong leadership, great, but when you get to cross-agency, that's when it gets really challenging, because, for one agency to go to another agency and say, we need to do this together, that might work, but it might not. And so how do you resolve that leadership from the governor's office? So the concept was, well, could there be somebody in the governor's office, say, another cabinet secretary, like what Richard Figueroa was before he went to DHCS, that's responsible for overseeing the implementation of all this, planning for our population, for older adults, people with disabilities, and because it impacts all of these other entities. So, you know, that was where that concept came from. So Anna wanted to weigh in.
Well, and on that level, you know, we talked about long-term care council and committee, and we talked about aging, and I just want to kind of put it on the table, are we talking about aging and disability? Yes. Because I want to make sure that, you know, from my perspective, if we're doing this, right, it's not just aging, it's also disability. And same with the czar, right? Like you just mentioned that this is not just an aging czar, right? This is aging and disability czar, that we'll fight over who goes first, disability or aging.
Right.
Just
No, it's.
okay. We've had these conversations in the past, so I'm sorry.
I should have clarified that.
So I just want to put that out there just to make sure we're on the same table. And then to speak against the no wrong door, I mean, that's the piece that will make a state consolidation work for the individuals, is that local level focus on no wrong door. So as long as we keep that at the heart and you know, an important element that's a value that's throughout the process, I think that we can have success, and other states have, right? But I think we can't forget about the individuals, right? This is all about the people living out on that dirt road or in that apartment complex that really need access to the services, right? So keeping that human-centered, person-centered piece on the local level is what will create change for the people we're trying to influence. So with that.
Lydia, and then Mark.
Really quick. Yeah.
Jeff, great. Yeah, we'll go to Jeff first, and then,
okay.
No, after you.
Oh, okay. Two quick thoughts. One is I used to think about this issue, because it's come up many times in my career, that, you know, at the state level, to kind of model what we wanted to encourage at the local level, like Ellen described with San Diego. So that's just one straight thought. It's like, what are we trying to model that we want? Okay, and then the second thought is, would this help my issue of having 3 departments overseeing one little program that serves 37,000 very complex people, as well as my adult day programs? I'll throw in a 4th program, as well as the adult daycare food program, which is Department of Education, which is 5. And then you throw in fire departments and also and AAAs and all that. I don't know how much other departments want to give up their, especially with federal rules and all that, but if it could solve some of that craziness that goes on in my world, I'm all for it. But if it doesn't solve that,
The judge of our master the law.
Like it adds another department?
Exactly. For sure, the last thing that would be helpful is another exercise in reorg that really doesn't ultimately, you don't want to turn it up.
Just so the concern.
Right, but that's where good leadership comes in. So Jeff, and then we're gonna hear from Mark.
that's mine.
Coming from the perspective of a smaller constituency, a consolidation like this can be very threatening, because you get lost in the shuffle. And that's why it is very important to have recommendations such as the planning councils, such as the legislative committees, as Patty expressed, because you need entrances to get into so that you don't get lost.
Very, very good. Yeah. Thank you, Jeff. That's really important. Okay, so Mark.
Sure, great, thank you. You know, and it's interesting, I'm glad that Jeff raised the point that he did and Lydia did as well, because I think the important thing about the sort of organizational considerations, and I will say the administration has no position on any sort of restructuring proposals at this moment. These are all great, good ideas and good thinking, but, in my history with the state, it can be positive and negative, right? I mean, you can bring a bunch of programs together, but if the change isn't managed properly, it doesn't always have the intended results. And kind of to your point, Lydia, it's kind of like at the local level, what's the effect? Like, we can bring these programs together, but if we haven't developed those relationships, if the local partners are still looking to a different state entity, it could create a lot of confusion, right? And you also have to be careful that you don't want, smaller programs to be buried in the mix. So if you bring on a large program and they sort of like consume all of the spotlight, then the smaller programs can get ignored. So anyway, that, like I say, the administration doesn't have a position on any restructuring proposals at the moment. Regarding the strategic plan that CDA is working on, this is an effort we started back in October, and we've been doing a lot of I'm sorry. Because of the phone. Yes. Oh, sorry, Patty. I didn't see you back there.
Sorry, you guys, I have a 7-hour drive back.
Okay. Thank you for coming. So we've been working on the strategic plan since October, a lot of internal working. And I can't really share out a lot of the details in terms of wording because it's still being worked through. Our goal is to preview the draft strategic plan at the Stakeholder Advisory Committee on the 21st. What I can say is what you'll see is a really good dovetail. A lot of the master plan for aging, vision, mission, values, you'll see reflected in our own plan. So there's a lot of similarities. What I can tell you is what the major goal areas will be. So we do have a goal around master plan for aging, so development, implementation, timeframes, and we'll have key objectives tied to that goal. The second goal is around quality customer service delivery. So what does it mean for CDA to deliver quality customer service? And again, we'll have a lot of specific objectives about how we intend to improve the service that CDA delivers to our partners. The third goal will be engage around age. So that's really communications, how we will communicate, continue to advocate for and promote our programs. And then the final one is really more of a department-specific goal. However, it should help local agencies and providers, and that is creating a 21st century CDA. Surprise, you look at our facilities, there's work to do. But, it's really how can we restructure our own organization internally to be more effective, streamline our operations, acquire newer, better technology to really provide services at the local level. So a lot of work around there, but that's just a preview.
Great.
Thank you.
Great.
Thank you.
Well, that sounds really excellent. Look forward to hearing about it. So, is there any other comments that people want to make about this issue? I can see people packing up their bags. So Marty's like,
The longer the drive, the quicker you pack.
I don't blame you. For our San Mateo and, Bay Area folks, or rural areas,
That's good.
San Diego, et cetera. Thank you all. I want to thank Maya and Marty for just doing a fabulous job presenting, as well as Lydia. We covered a lot of issues in a short amount of time. There's danger to that. I don't think we solved the problems by any stretch of the imagination, but at least they're being talked about, and I think the writing group process will have a lot of opportunities to continue these discussions. Really, some hard issues, and some of the time that we might want to use in upcoming meetings might be for really figuring out how we're going to present some of these issues where, especially where there's not agreement. So, any other comments from anybody? Mark, before you go to public comment?
Sarah, this is Karen. Can you identify for the issue that Christina raised around financing and the complexity, which work group that is in?
Yes, great question. That's affordability and financing, and that's Nina is leading that group. Nina from AARP. Yes.
Got it. Okay.
Okay. Oh, Nina. Yes. And then I'll do those. No problem.
So affordability, just so you know, affordability folks, I send around calendar invites, and I just send it to the whole section. for our writing group to meet next Tuesday, I'm sorry, from 4 to 5:30, because that's what it was. So it'll be a really fun day. And graphics, for, I sent it to you, Jasmine and Lydia, it is ready. So you guys are ready before we share with everybody. So, okay. I think this is really.
We'll send out this graphic to everybody, to review, and then we can figure out what, yeah.
This may be a little off topic, but I think, I don't want to lose this thought. There's the technical expert panel that CMS is putting together to develop LTSS outcome measures. I was just curious, I'm applying for it, a colleague of mine in Tennessee applied. Has anyone in this room applied for that? I think we need to monitor that and track it if none of us get on that panel, because I think that does inform our work, particularly the research committee and how it ties in with what we're talking about. Anybody? Okay.
Yeah, thank you for that. Okay, so there you are.
Okay, great. Thank you, Sarah. All right, well, we will move into public comment then. I'm sorry,
We need to
Carrie?
do public comment first. Okay.
Yes, and then you'll do your wrap up.
Yeah.
So, anybody on the phone, do we have any public comments? One? Okay, we have somebody on the phone, let's go ahead and, please, state your comment.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, I'm Randy Hickson, Californians with Disability Rights. And I would like to say that I recommend that we do what the Master Plan for Aging Special Committee recommends. Recommendation, develop a public benefit system for long-term care services and supports that can ease the cost burden of long-term care for Californians. Such benefit should give individuals access to long-term care services and supports of their choosing, and that are appropriate for their needs. A universal public LTS benefit will reduce the reliance on Medi-Cal, add substantial savings to the state, and help middle-income families with cost of care. A public LTS benefit will also serve the needs of Californians, regardless of race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, gender, and physical ability. It just makes sense. After I read this statement, and the Californians Disability Rights agrees with this, that it just makes sense that we have some kind of public financing through the state and keep it funded. And that's the biggest thing of all. Insurance companies are going to do what they're going to do, and agencies are going to do what they're going to do. But if we always have it publicly funded, it's never going to go away.
Okay. Thank you for your comment. In the room? Okay.
Hi, my name is Julia Hales. I'm Marvin's ADRC coordinator. I just have to say, I was so excited to hear all of the express and indirect support around the room from No Wrong Door. I did hear that from Ellen and Nina and Maya all. What you're talking about, the communication between the systems is the No Wrong Door. I just wanted to use this moment to advocate, again, that when we're talking about aging, it really to emphasize on is that, my 70-year-old mom doesn't want to talk about her age. She wants to talk about the fact that her hip isn't operating the way it did 20 years ago. When we're talking about aging, we're talking about aging and disability. And really, if we continue to keep aging and disability separate, we're just asking to continue a broken and dysfunctional system and growing in our state. I also just wanted to emphasize again that with aging and disability and the restructure, that it's really a wonderful opportunity for us to get creative and to utilize other supports. I love the idea of real estate. Really, it's important. I think what Ellen had brought up earlier is that there's a huge rush in time, and for things that are as complex as IHSS and financing long-term care benefits, really, this just isn't enough time. This is to be intentional and thoughtful. And I really would like to encourage looking at states like Oregon, Washington, Nevada, New Jersey, Vermont, Washington, Wisconsin. No one has the one cure-all for how to bridge the gap between healthcare and social services and share data across systems. But other states are trying, and I think it'd be a disservice not to look. also, as we're moving into, with healthcare, this is really an opportunity to attract some of that attention as healthcare plans and systems more and more are acknowledging the importance of social determinants of health. And really, that is what we are addressing through all of these services that we're providing. And through an outcomes and data-driven approach, we can continue to work on collaboration and cross communication with healthcare services.
Katie Weber, Health Solutions. First of all, I want to thank everybody here today. Great discussion. Many recommendations and leadership for the master plan and aging. I'd like to support the recommendations for integrated care. One of the national models to consider is the Medicare community. For those that are familiar with that, it's a model that was developed by Joanne Lynn and colleagues, which integrates medical and non-medical services. We can expand the model. Currently, the model just focuses on the frail elderly, but we can expand it to include population health, so we can catch them further upstream. But that could be done through the universal assessment, meaning that no wrong door, as we talked about, that can integrate across healthcare, behavioral health, and social services. So as you all highlighted here today, that's very important for those independent in the community. The goal of the model is to help older adults and adults with disabilities to stay independent in the community. It also has been goal to maintain or improve functional or cognitive limitations. That was it's aligned with the Chronic Care Act, because the Chronic Care Act expands the Medicare Advantage to include functional limitations. But the goal is the shift of the Chronic Care Act is actually focused on function, and that addresses those older adults and also adults with disabilities. As part of the proposed recommendation, Joanne Lynn recommended California to enable some manageable number of counties, maybe 6 to 8, to model this, and delivering with pets for support. It has a goal of optimal elder care and also adults with disabilities, better experience for elders and families, more equitable and lower per capita costs. California can provide a technical assistance center, provide data, coordinate the interface with various agencies and resources, and encourage collaboration, and cooperate in trying to reduce regulatory barriers at the state and federal level. A few of who is with Bell, because obviously we're all learning together, just in the evaluation with UTI. We could build off the PACE program, and that's what's built around. But also, we could look at counties that don't have an existing PACE program as well. It's a model that we can build collaboration across agencies, including the independent living, the AAA's, PACE, Meals on Wheels, and other nonprofits. And it's a model that helps us access financing across all these different agencies. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I believe we have somebody on the phone who'd like to make a comment. Please go ahead and make your comment.
Hi, my name is George Kignarian. I'm with Six Beds, which is a statewide trade association representing residential care homes. I just wanted to express some concern about how the Cal-AIM proposal may leave some of the 1915C waiver programs behind in the dust, such as the assisted living waiver program. During DHCS's initial presentation, they essentially said that the 1915C waivers, such as the assisted living waiver, are limited in terms of lack of state wideness and enrollment caps. And they essentially said that they envision the in lieu of services picking up or building off where the waiver programs are leaving off. And I really believe that should concern everyone here, because while the 1915C waiver programs have relatively objective enrollment criteria, the in lieu of services that have been proposed are very clearly optional services. We can't rely on health plans delivering assisted living type services through what are optional services. If we rely on health plans for these types of services, we're going to have reduced access for consumers. So we have to be very clear that the in lieu of services aren't substitutes for the 1915C waivers. We have to advocate for increased capacity for these waivers. And the problem is DHCS is acting like the 1915C waivers can't be statewide and that their enrollment caps can't be increased. They're acting like it's a helpless situation. But the statewide-ness situation and increases to enrollment capacity are within the power of both the administration and the legislature through the budget process. And this concern also leads me to my other concern of the interaction of the 1915C waivers with mandatory managed care enrollment. The IHSS has said that the 1915C waivers are being carved out, but I still haven't seen a solid answer on how enrollment in the waiver program interacts mechanically with the mandatory managed care requirement, and we need to get more clarification on these issues because they're very important. Thank you.
Great, thank you for your comment. I believe we have another caller. Not coming through. Okay, seems our last commenter did not come through. Any public comments remaining in the room? Okay. So I want to remind folks, we do on our website, our new website, do have a survey feedback form. So if you're not able to get through, please feel free to make your public comment through the.
Hello?
Oh, I'm sorry. It sounds like the person made it through. Good. Please go ahead.
Hi, this is Connie Arnold. I have several comments. First is, I believe it should be called Administration on Community and Independent Living, ACIL. That would be the best for a consolidation. Secondly, on the waiver, one of the problems with the waivers is that the local agencies do not have any kind of contracted criteria for length of time to process people's waivers. So they're taking a long time to process the waivers for people that are on waiting lists. That's an issue that needs to be addressed. Plus the issue about who can be an IHO provider is a problem when it's linked to IHSS and all that a person has to go to, and say somebody has an emergency and needs a substitute. They'd like to use an old provider that used to work for them 5 years ago, or they have an RN that was willing to provide services, but unfortunately they were unable to do that because the people were not already enrolled in IHSS. So that needs to be delinked. The managed care under CCI was not providing good quality, any kind of waivers in lieu of waiver services until a person got on a waiver, and that's a problematic issue. The people in the disability community are opposed to mandatory managed care system for everybody with no opt-out and no MERS, no medical exemption requests being granted for people that need that. So those need to be considered. And assuming that the managed care system, which doesn't do things very well, is going to do it very well in terms of any kind of waiver program, that is the most ridiculous idea. And that's problematic. And I agree with the previous caller that you do need to increase the, you need to have the assisted living waivers. There are a number of people that want to be in assisted living complexes, and that on yesterday's conference, there was listing of an item that you had posted about an Illinois program for assisted living waivers for low to middle income people. And it sounded, you know, fairly good and something that should be explored. I'm sure I have more comments, but that's it for now. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you so much. All right, I will turn it over to Carrie to do our wrap-up.
All right, well, I think it was an incredibly successful meeting. You guys, congratulations on getting through so much complicated information. And I think really next steps in terms of CDA is to make sure that we have all the calendar invites for the meetings coming up. We have the 21st, we have the 27th, we have the 30th, we have the 19th of February, we have a lot of these. So on that first slide, we have the Bolden meeting that we're in, and it doesn't seem to get closer to the bottom. We keep adding meetings. So
some of the top ones are.
there we go. Yeah. I want to show like where we've been. I mean, look what we've gotten through. It's pretty amazing. We have Our next meeting is January 27th with IHSS Part 2. And if you're part of that planning group, please reach out to me. And we'll be doing some writing, we'll have some writing time if we need it on the 27th. And then we have the 30th, February 19th, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. Thanks, everybody, and meeting adjourned.
Correct.
Yeah, thank you, Karen.
Thank you.
Thank you.